Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Izabela Rzeszowska. A massacre in a small, quiet town on an island shocked the local community. 6 people were killed, including 3 children. Damian Rzeszowski, born in 1989 in southern Poland, struggled to find a stable job after serving in the army. At that time, he was in a relationship with his girlfriend, Izabela. In 2004, seeking a better life, Damian and Izabela decided to move from Poland to another country. They chose the island of Jersey in the UK, a picturesque and thriving tourist destination, as their ideal place for a peaceful family life. They relocated from Poland to Great Britain and settled in a small community called St. Helier on Jersey's Victoria Street. This settlement had a Polish community of about 5,000 people, which made them feel at home. Damian found work as a builder, constructing houses and earning a good income. The couple married in 2005 and soon had 2 children, their eldest daughter, Kinga, and their youngest son, Kasper. Izabela became a housewife, dedicating her time to caring for the children and managing the household. Izabela's father also moved from Poland to live with them. Izabela became friends with their neighbors, and their children also became friends. However, Damian eventually grew tired of living on the island and wanted to return to Poland. Izabela disagreed with this. Secretly, he saved money and bought a house in Poland. He later told Izabela about the house, saying they needed to move back, which led to an argument. During this argument, Izabela revealed she was having an affair, to which Damian reacted aggressively, despite having been unfaithful himself. Damian was a devout Catholic, whose beliefs did not condone divorce. He could not forgive his wife. He harbored resentment toward her. In despair, he attempted to end her life by taking 80 antidepressant pills. He was hospitalized, treated with gastric lavage, and then released. Surprisingly, his psychological evaluation was normal, and he received no further treatment. Feeling guilty for her affair, Izabela pleaded for forgiveness to save their family. She tried to improve, becoming the best wife she could be, and asked for a fresh start. Damian agreed and suggested they take a vacation to Poland. Izabela thought it would be a good idea to escape from their domestic problems. At the end of July 2011, they took a short road trip to Poland to visit relatives and see the house Damian had bought. He hoped to persuade his wife to stay there. During the trip, they avoided arguments and relaxed, enjoying time with family. Everyone was happy, and there was hope for a better future. However, the trip was spoiled by the bad news that the house Damian bought was never built because the developer had deceived him, causing them to lose all their savings. At the end of the trip, Damian tried to convince Izabela to stay in Poland, but his plan failed. Izabela preferred to live in Great Britain, believing it offered more opportunities for her and their children, so she refused to stay in Poland. Upset by the house deception, the Damian family returned to Great Britain. They arrived home at 8 a.m. on August 14, 2011. Damian was exhausted from driving non-stop, which made him irritable with his wife. Instead of resting after the tiring trip, they decided to have a barbecue and meet with friends. Around 11 a.m., Izabela's friend, 34-year-old Marta, visited with her 5-year-old daughter, Julia. Izabela and Marta shared a lot in common, as both were housewives from Poland, and their daughters were friends. At the time, Marta was getting a divorce because her husband had been unfaithful. While the children played, the adults had a barbecue. After a while, 6-year-old Kinga and 1.5-year-old Kasper became tired and went to bed. Damian went inside with them. Later, Izabela went into the house to check on the children and discovered that Damian was not with them. They were sleeping alone. When Damian returned, he had an argument with Izabela after she scolded him for leaving the children unattended. Although they made up, Damien remained in a bad mood. He then began drinking whiskey, which led to a tragic series of events. While the women were talking outside and Isabella's 55-year-old father, Merrick, was watching TV in the room, at around 3 p.m., Damien grabbed 2 knives from the kitchen and attacked his father-in-law. Merrick, who was initially stabbed in the chest, tried to crawl away to warn Isabella and his grandchildren but was stabbed 9 times. Damien then went to the living room where the children were playing. He stabbed his son Casper 13 times. Kinga and Julia screamed in frustration for help. Damien then turned on his daughter, stabbing her 16 times, and continued to attack Julia, stabbing her 16 times. The screams alerted Marta and Isabella, who rushed into the house. Damien attacked Marta and then his wife, stabbing Isabella 3 times near the heart. Despite her injuries, Isabella attempted to dial the emergency number, mistakenly dialing 997, the Polish emergency number, instead of the UK's 999. She then made it outside, screaming and calling for help. The Damien realized she was alive and went out into the street to continue attacking her. Passers-by tried to help the Isabella by throwing stones at him, but he didn't stop. The attacker began to threaten them, prompting someone to call emergency services at 999. After attacking his family and friends, Damien stabbed himself multiple times in the chest. By this time, an ambulance and police had arrived at the house, and he was rushed to hospital in Berkshire. In front of the house, Isabella was lying in serious condition. Inside, the police found a horrifying scene. 3 children were lying covered in blood in the living room, along with Marta. Marta and the girls were still showing signs of life. In the hallway was the lifeless body of Marek Garska, who died at the scene. Marta, Isabella, Kinga, and Julia were alive but in critical condition. They were rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, all of them died a few hours later. In just 15 minutes, he killed 6 people. Neighbors passing by told the police that they saw Damien appearing deranged. He was running, shouting something in Polish, and attacking with a knife. Neighbors reported hearing screams and called 999. Damien received necessary medical treatment at the hospital and survived. 5 days after being hospitalized, he was arrested. He claimed he didn't remember anything and did not confess to the murders. Damien mentioned hearing voices in his hymn. He felt he was not himself and couldn't recall his actions. Later, Damien pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of 6 people due to insanity. Those close to the family mentioned that Damien and Isabella had been experiencing difficult times recently. They often argued and had planned to attend family therapy sessions upon returning from their trip. With testimony from over 40 witnesses, a complete picture of the events was established. The bodies of the 6 victims were returned to Poland for burial. In court, Damien claimed that he had no clear memory of the events due to dementia. His lawyer argued that he had always been a quiet and calm person who would never harm his loved ones under normal circumstances. Damien was also grieving and continued to take antidepressants. However, evidence suggested that he was not the model family man he portrayed himself to be. After moving to the UK, Damien allegedly became violent with his wife, according to her relatives. He also regularly hired call girls. Acquaintances described him as hot-tempered and aggressive, unable to control his emotions and anger. The news of his wife's infidelity worsened the situation. Damien harbored resentment against his spouse and later discovered he had lost his house money. In court, the prosecutor stated that Damien faced the prospect of a broken marriage and concluded that if the family couldn't remain intact, it shouldn't continue at all. The prosecutor argued that Damien was not suffering from any mental disorder during the incident. The psychiatrist reported that, after questioning the Damien 5 days post-attack, he found no signs of psychosis and considered him sane. The doctors acknowledged that Damien admitted to killing everyone and taking responsibility for it. On October 9, 2012, Damien Rzeszowski was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison for each victim, to be served concurrently. This sentence sparked significant public disapproval. Locals were upset that for the brutal murder of 6 people, he would be released after only 30 years, and they feared he might resume his violent behavior. Damien was sent to a maximum security prison in Yorkshire, but 6 years later, on March 31, 2018, he was found dead in his cell, having hanged himself. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Megan Landowski. Located on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay in Portsmouth, Virginia, is a bustling seaport town that is also home to both the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. The town's tree-lined streets are home to naval officers and their families. Among them is Navy officer Chris Short, his wife Angela, and 3 stepchildren, Elizabeth, Megan, and Corey. After a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Chris was transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth, much to his family's delight. 16-year-old Megan, the eldest of the siblings, was excited to start her new life in Portsmouth. She promptly signed up for dance classes, as she had a strong passion for dance. Megan had a natural ability and quickly excelled in various dance styles, starting with ballet. Her mother, Angela, described Megan as a lovely, friendly, and talented young woman who easily settled into her new school, Woodrow Wilson High School. Megan was a lively and kind person, and that helped her swiftly made friends at her prestigious dance high school. However, she longed to attend a regular high school to be with her neighborhood friends. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early for school and had a conversation with her mother about an upcoming test. They said their goodbyes, and Megan headed off to class. Unbeknownst to her mother, Angela, this would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Megan's school day finished earlier than usual, so she headed home. Her mother had asked her to call as soon as she arrived. When Megan got home, she left a voicemail for her mother, telling her all about her day, letting her know she was safe, and saying she loved her. After that, Megan started making herself some lunch. However, the situation took a devastating turn around 4 p.m. that day. Chris, Megan's stepfather, came home to find the front door open. At first, he wasn't too worried, knowing Megan had been reminded to keep it closed. But he planned to remind her again. As he called out her name while walking through the house, he was met with only silence. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific scene. Megan was lying lifeless on the floor, a victim of murder. Chris later described the scene, saying Megan looked like a porcelain doll, eerily still and staring blankly into space. Local detective Doug Funkhauser was on his way to celebrate his anniversary with his wife when he received a distressing call about the murder of a young girl in town. He rushed to the scene, where he was met with a shocking and disturbing sight. As he neared the house, he noticed blood stains on the door handle. Inside, he found Megan's body on the kitchen floor, partially naked and surrounded by a large pool of blood. She had multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed shut with tape. As a seasoned investigator, Detective Doug had seen many brutal cases, but this one stood out due to the victim's young age. The fact that he had 3 children of his own made him even more determined to catch the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Investigators found no signs that the killer had broken into the house. However, a leaf found inside the house, which matched the bush outside the first-floor window, suggested that the attacker entered through that window. The assault is believed to have started in an upstairs bedroom. Signs of a struggle were evident, with the bed in disarray. On the floor, police found Megan's underwear. An adhesive tape box discovered under the bed was matched to the tape used to restrain Megan's arms and cover her face. Blood stains on the tape were collected for further analysis. Additionally, pillows, sheets, and blankets from the bed were collected for forensic examination. Further investigation of the bedroom revealed new evidence. Seminal fluid was found on the duvet and in Megan's underwear, indicating that she had been sexually assaulted before being brutally murdered. Downstairs, Megan sustained 43 stab wounds, 11 of which were inflicted after she had already died. Her body was discovered naked from the waist down, with her arms bound behind her back using tape. The forensic team quickly identified a murder weapon when they noticed a knife was missing from its holder on the kitchen counter. Later, a knife was found in the sink. It was determined that Megan was first attacked in her room but managed to escape downstairs, where she was fatally assaulted. The perpetrator then moved through the house, leaving footprints behind. After washing their hands in the sink, they left one of the 2 knives used in the murder. The other knife, taken from the kitchen, was found in a nearby storm drain. Detectives urgently needed to catch the killer. They quickly started investigating, thoroughly searching the neighborhood for witnesses who may have seen or heard something suspicious during the crime. However, no one came forward with any relevant information. It seemed the perpetrator had escaped in broad daylight. The town was gripped with fear, as parents worried about their children's safety, and many were too afraid to sleep at night knowing a killer was still at large. After the initial shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly told the police who they suspected was responsible. They accused Robert Hickey, someone they used to know, who had a troubled past, and they were confident in their accusation. When Megan was 16, she was sexually assaulted by Robert Hickey, a Navy colleague of her stepfather Chris. Robert and Chris worked together as technicians and had become close friends. Chris and his family would often invite the Robert over. After being sexually assaulted, Megan became withdrawn and her grades started to slip. Chris noticed the change in her and asked what was wrong, but Megan was hesitant to talk about it at first. Eventually, she opened up to Chris and told him that Robert had been secretly assaulting her. Chris was furious and disgusted. He immediately cut off all ties with the Robert family and reported the incidents. 5 months before her murder, Megan's parents had started legal proceedings against Robert, and a trial was pending. Now, they suspected that Robert had killed Megan to prevent her from testifying against him in court. They thought he was afraid of damaging his reputation and going to prison. Megan had even expressed her fear that Robert would come after her, and sadly, it seemed her fears had come true. Officers went to Robert's home to search for evidence linking him to a murder. Although they didn't find any direct evidence, a later examination of his computer, they discovered he had deleted some data. A deleted file was recovered, containing illicit images of minors, which led to Robert being charged with possessing child pornography. This made him the main suspect in the murder investigation. When questioned about the murder, Robert appeared nervous but claimed he was at the Navy base all day. He denied any involvement and said he didn't leave the base. However, after checking his alibi with colleagues, police found a gap in his timeline, suggesting he could have been suspect. Security footage was checked, but it showed that Robert had not left the base. Despite this, he was still considered a suspect and could not be completely cleared of suspicion. A DNA sample was collected from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. However, the results revealed that there was no match, ruling Robert out as Megan's killer. This unexpected outcome left the officers disheartened, as they were now without leads or suspects other. The focus then shifted to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After collecting a DNA sample, Chris was quickly cleared as a suspect. Megan's family members, including her younger brother Corey, were also eliminated as suspects. An autopsy showed that Megan was murdered with extreme brutality, described as an overkill. This level of violence indicated that the perpetrator was fueled by intense anger, which raised questions about their motive. Megan was well liked and didn't appear to have any enemies. It seemed likely that the killer was someone she knew. However, the lack of obvious enemies made it even more puzzling as to who could have committed such a horrific crime. As the investigation continued without identifying any suspects, Megan's parents were faced with the disturbing reality that her case may remain unsolved forever, denying them justice for their daughter. To search new leads, detectives looked into Megan's school life, looking into whether she might have had a secret boyfriend, someone who admired her, or an enemy within her school. They questioned one of Megan's close friends, hoping to gain useful information, but the friend couldn't provide any significant details. The police then spoke with other people from Woodrow Wilson High School who knew Megan. They discovered that she had been in a few romantic relationships, but none of them were serious. Although none of these individuals seemed suspicious, but the police still took DNA samples from these people for further investigation. Forensic experts analyzed DNA evidence from the crime scene to determine the perpetrator's geographical origin. The results suggested that the perpetrator was an African-American male. After 6 months with no significant leads, a classmate provided a list of boys Megan had flirted with. The police reviewed the list and found that all the individuals, except one, had already been interviewed. The exception was 17-year-old Robert Lee Barnes. Megan had met Barnes through a performance arts program at Churchill High School, where they both participated. Megan had told a friend that she thought Barnes had feelings for her, but she didn't feel the same way. Barnes was a talented violinist and a diligent student with no disciplinary issues. He was friends with Megan and had visited her home several times. Her parents described him as polite and kind. When questioned by police, Barnes followed the standard procedure and described Megan as kind. Initially, the police interview with Robert did not raise any suspicions. However, when asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample, Robert hesitated, then he refusing. This refusal was unusual, as all of Megan's other classmates had agreed to cooperate. When questioned about his refusal, Robert explained that his mother would not approve of him providing a DNA sample. The police clarified that, as he's 17 years old, Robert did not need his mother's consent. Nevertheless, Robert declined again, leaving the investigators with the feeling that something was not quite right about him. At the end of the interview, Robert was requested to obtain his mother's consent for the DNA sample and to contact the investigators afterward. The next day, Robert requested a meeting with the investigators. When asked if he had obtained his mother's consent, he replied that he had not. However, he offered to provide a DNA sample in the form of the bubble gum he was chewing. He removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a latex glove, and handed it over to the investigators. Despite the investigators continued to suspect that Robert might be hiding something. Later on, the detective got a call from the lab that was analyzing the bubble gum. The lab asked where the gum had come from. After the detective confirmed that he saw Barnes put the gum into the glove, the lab asked if Barnes was under constant watch. This was surprisingly, because the DNA on the gum belonged to a female. It turned out that Barnes had switched the gum he was chewing with a different piece, which he then gave as his sample. On October 23, 2008, Barnes was brought in for questioning again, this time with his mother. The police wanted to confront him with the DNA results. During the interview, after being questioned about the gum, Barnes made a slip of the tongue by saying, "This happened on Thursday." Up to that point, no individual interviewed by police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When questioned about this by the police, Barnes gave a very unreasonable and suspicious explanation. He said that Megan had invited him to her home. Upon arrival, he found her being held at gunpoint by a masked person. According to Barnes, the attacker then pointed the gun at him and forced him to tie Megan up. Barnes further said that he was forced to sexually assault Megan against his will. He then stated that they all went downstairs, where the assailant seized a knife and stabbed Megan. Additionally, Barnes stated that the attacker compelled him to inflict an injury on himself, thereby leaving his blood at the scene. However, Barnes had made up this story to make himself appear as a victim and explain away any evidence that might implicate him. The police were not convinced by his story and do not believe any of his testimony. Police presented Barnes with evidence of footprints found at the scene, noting that only his footprints were present, with no sign of the alleged assailant's footprints. However, before Barnes could respond, his mother interrupted, defending his character and stating that he was a good and innocent kid. However, after taking a DNA sample from Barnes and analyzing it, the results revealed a match between his DNA and DNA evidence from the crime scene, contradicting his claims of innocence. Consequently, Robert Lee Barnes was arrested and charged with the murder of Megan Landowski. Megan's parents were shocked by the news, and they struggled to understand how the quiet boy who rode the school bus with their daughter could commit such a violent act. According to the police investigation, Barnes likely entered the home through a window that afternoon, sexually assaulted Megan in her bedroom, finally brutally killing her. Megan managed to escape downstairs, but Barnes chased after her and stabbed her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she had died. He then left the scene and continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Barnes had become fixated on Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Megan rejected his advances, Barnes became coercive and violent, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. In September 2009, Barnes accepted a plea deal that allowed him to avoid being tried as an adult, despite having turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual battery. Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of whether Barnes was motivated by love, desire, anger, or rejection, nothing justifies his heinous actions. Instead of moving on, Barnes chose a dark path that led to a tragic end. This choice not only took an innocent life but also destroyed his own and hurt the people who Megan's loved ones. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, Chess Club, Science Club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise was protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22-year-old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23-year-old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Petersburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Tepins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continue to live a lavish lifestyle and continue to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Tepins, but they didn't know the Tepins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Tepins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Turpins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Turpins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland. This is evident from that they have come here many times, and they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, the girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Mackenzie Lueck. Mackenzie Lueck was born on March 8, 1996. Her father, Gregory Lueck, worked in healthcare logistics and administration, while her mother, Diana, was a homemaker. She grew up in El Segundo, Los Angeles County, California, with an older brother and two younger brothers. Mackenzie attended El Segundo High School, where she was on the swim team and played water polo. She was a dedicated student with a passion for art, music, and animals. After graduating, she enrolled at the University of Utah, majoring in kinesiology and nursing. She was also involved in the Alpha Kappa Omega sorority. While at the University of Utah, she expressed her support for women's rights and later left one of the major political parties to join a third conservative party. Mackenzie works at a biotesting company in Salt Lake City. She recalls the days when she biked to the Pacific Ocean, wearing a bikini and sunbathing in the high desert. She plans to pursue a career in the healthcare field, is considering nursing or medical school, and is scheduled to graduate in May 2020. The Luick family was typical, but everything changed on June 17, 2019, when Mackenzie returned to Salt Lake City after her grandmother's funeral. Early on the morning of June 17, around 2 a.m., Mackenzie texted her mother after landing at Salt Lake City International Airport from California, "Landed and love you, Mom." However, when Diana tried to contact Mackenzie again, she realized that her daughter's phone was turned off. Gregory also called Mackenzie, but it went straight to voicemail, leaving the Luick family worried about her well-being. On June 20th, Mackenzie's parents discovered that her friends had not heard from her either. They reported Mackenzie missing to the Salt Lake City Police Department. Over the next 2 weeks, Mackenzie's family attempted to track her down from California. Members of Mackenzie's Alpha Kappa Omega sorority began searching for her in Utah. Together, they created a Find Mackenzie Luick Facebook page to bring national media attention to the matter. Investigators are working to figure out what happened. They have video evidence showing Mackenzie at the airport. She was then taken by a Lyft driver to Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, about 13 miles from the airport. Investigators have also verified Mackenzie's cell phone information, confirming that she was at the park. Detectives have discovered that Mackenzie had been exchanging text messages with a stranger named Iola Ajayi. Mackenzie is believed to have met Iola through a dating website and agreed to meet. The last text message Mackenzie sent to Iola was at 2:58 a.m. Cell phone data showed that both Mackenzie and Iola were at Hatch Park, and at 2:59 a.m., Mackenzie's phone stopped transmitting location data, indicating that her phone was turned off. Detectives then tracked Iola's cell phone signal, leading them from the park to his home at 547 North 1000 West in the Fair Park neighborhood. Investigators determined that Iola's cell phone was at his home at 3:07 a.m., just 7 to 8 minutes after he picked up Mackenzie from the park. Based on this evidence, detectives decided to execute a search warrant at Iola's home because he was considered a prime suspect in Mackenzie's disappearance. During the search of Iola's residence, a neighbor reported a terrible odor coming from a gasoline-fueled campfire in Iola's backyard, next to a garage, on June 17th and 18th. Investigators impounded Iola's vehicle when they detected a strong odor of gasoline and found a red gasoline can in the trunk. They determined that Iola had purchased a similar can of gasoline at a local store on the morning of Mackenzie's disappearance, at 9 a.m. After Iola was arrested, investigators analyzed his cell phone records and located the phone in Logan Canyon, where Iola admitted to his attorney that he had buried Mackenzie's body on June 25th, between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation of the area and discovered a disturbed dirt in a wooded area near a major road. There, they found the charred remains of a person. An autopsy conducted on July 3rd identified the body as that of Mackenzie Luick. She had been bound with rope behind her back. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the left side of the skull and ruled her death a homicide. On October 7, 2020, Iola was convicted of first-degree murder and third-degree indignity in connection with Mackenzie's death. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and an additional 5 years in prison for the indignity to Mackenzie's body. Iola was also charged with kidnapping another woman he met on a dating app in March 2018. The victim turned herself in after Iola was arrested for Mackenzie's murder. On October 7, 2020, Iola pleaded guilty to second-degree sexual abuse in connection with that case and was later sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. Iola was charged with 19 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. These charges arose in August 2019 after police discovered multiple images of child pornography on his computer during the investigation into Mackenzie's death. The images, allegedly depicting children between the ages of 4 and 8, were discovered on July 2. Iola pleaded not guilty on October 1, 2020, and the charges related to the obscene act were later dismissed. The tragic loss of Mackenzie Lueck has shocked her loved ones and the nation. Her bright smile, zest for life, and dream of making a difference were taken from her in a senseless way. Nevertheless, Mackenzie's loved ones have come together to remember and honor her life. Her sorority friends remember her as a shining light, always ready to help and encourage. Through her art, music, and love for animals, Mackenzie's spirit lives on. Her story serves as a reminder to be vigilant and cautious, especially when engaging in online dating services. But more importantly, it reminds us of the value of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. Rest in peace, Mackenzie Lueck. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and they lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christy was 14, she enjoyed spending time with her friends and sisters. They enjoyed going swimming at a nearby community, especially on hot days. Occasionally, Christy also babysat for families she knew. On August 22, a friend of Christy's asked her to babysit her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christy woke up around noon, and it was an extremely hot day, with temperatures reaching 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So Christy decided that a swim would be a great way to relax and cool off. She brought her younger sister, Kim, to the community with her. Kim jumped right into the water while Christy chose to relax on a lounge chair. A while later, her friend came to chat, and after a short conversation, the two left together. Kim was surprised when her sister, Christy, left her alone without saying a word. Instead of following her, Kim chose to stay at the pool. Later, when she returned home, her sister had not returned. After several hours without any sign of Christy, Kim began to worry. She decided to search the neighborhood for her sister and soon met a neighbor. The neighbor informed her that about an hour ago, the police had discovered the body of a little girl a few miles away, but they had not yet identified her. Kim rushed home to inform her parents of the situation. They quickly contacted the police, saying that their daughter was missing. The police advised them to go to the morgue, where they would show them the body of the dead girl. Initially, her parents had difficulty recognizing the girl because of the severe bruising on her face. However, the mother later discovered a birthmark on the girl's leg and recognized it as Christy. After identifying the girl, the police informed the shocked family of what had happened. At around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report that he had found a human body in the woods behind the shopping center. He and his wife and son had gone there to buy toys for their children. Before entering the shopping center, the son asked to walk along a popular trail in the woods behind the building. This trail leads to a nearby river, which attracts casual walkers. After agreeing to let the boy walk, the parents allowed him to follow this path into the woods. When the family returned, they noticed a suspicious scene a short distance from the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man lying on the ground, bending over someone and hitting them with a piece of wood. When the man discovered the family, he immediately got up and ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was studying medicine, tried to check for a pulse but could not find one. The father quickly ran to a nearby shopping mall and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided police with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young man, about 20 years old, tall and slim, with shoulder-length black hair. He was wearing jean shorts and boots at the time of the incident. Using this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and turned it over to patrol officers. The crime scene examination did not turn up any significant clues. Although police discovered a piece of wood that was used as the murder weapon, they were unable to find any evidence that could identify the perpetrator. Notable details from the crime scene included that Christie's hands were tied with telephone cords and that her clothing was in disarray, as her bikini top was pulled down and her t-shirt and shoes were found nearby. However, forensic analysis did not reveal any evidence of sexual assault. Police therefore theorized that the perpetrator may have intended to attack Christie, but something frightened him and he ran away. Christie's sister reported to police that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol. So they went to speak with Carol. Carol reported that she had received a suspicious phone call that day from an unidentified man claiming to be a local radio DJ. He told her about a cheerleading competition that was supposed to take place in their town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. The caller invited her to meet at the entrance to a forest trail behind the mall, where someone would provide more information about the event, which was supposed to start at 1:45 p.m. Carol's account of the events aroused the suspicions of the police. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they encounter Christie and her sister. After a brief conversation, Carol invites Christie to come with her instead, and they decide to leave their sisters behind and head to the mall. When they reach the entrance to the woods, the girls sit on a fence and wait for someone to arrive. When no one appears after a while, Carol says she left Christie for a while to go to the mall and asks for the time. She returns a few minutes later, only to find Christie gone. Still waiting for a while longer, Christie does not reappear, prompting Carol to finally leave. The police investigation finds no evidence of cheerleading competitions in town as the anonymous caller had reported. This leads them to two possible explanations. The caller could be the killer trying to lure Carol into the woods, or it could be a prank unrelated to the murder. Unfortunately, the call cannot be traced, making it impossible to identify the caller. Further investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Carol's story. According to Carol, she had met Christie and her sister on the street while walking to the mall. However, Christie's sister, Kim, disputed this claim, saying that she and Christie were at the pool and that Carol had joined them there. But that was not all. Later that evening, Christie's mother met Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol apologized and said that things had gone too far. She said that she was supposed to be the target and that there were two people involved in the murder. However, when Christie's mother tried to get more information, Carol ended the conversation and left. The mother reported this to the police, who questioned Carol again. But Carol denied making these statements, maintaining that her original story was true. She later took a lie detector test, but showed no signs of deception when asked questions critical to Christie's case. As a result, the police took her off the suspect list and focused on finding other leads. The city was thrown into a state of widespread fear as news of the brutal murder spread in the days that followed. This fear was compounded by a disturbing realization: the police suspected the killer was a local resident, as they seemed to have a good understanding of the area behind the shopping center. Spurred on by this new information, the police launched a massive investigation, using every available resource. Their efforts were finally rewarded 3 days after Christie's murder, when a significant breakthrough was made in the case. At approximately 5 p.m., a Columbus Police Patrol officer spotted a man who closely resembled the composite sketch of Christie's killer. The patrol officer quickly notified the case officers, who arrived at the scene and asked the man to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, 25-year-old Jack Carmen, agreed to cooperate. However, the police faced a problem. Jack had a significant intellectual disability, with an IQ estimated at around 50, according to various tests. Because of his condition, Jack required specialized medical care and lived in an apartment provided by a nonprofit organization. He had difficulty with basic skills, including reading, writing, and speaking. Despite these challenges, the police on the Christie case could not ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. Jack's interrogation was difficult and exhausting. Most of the time, he responded with short answers or remained silent. The police began to question whether Jack fully understood the meaning behind their questions. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. Eventually, the police began to make some progress by asking the simplest and most specific questions possible. Using this approach, they were able to extract a confession from Jack. Jack stated that on the day of the incident, he began by leaving his apartment and taking a bus to the mall. His intention was to buy clothes, specifically pants and shirts. When he arrived at the mall, he walked across the parking lot toward the entrance and saw Christie sitting on a fence near a trail leading into the woods. Jack approached Christie, grabbed her, held her arms, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. After the assault, Christie attempted to flee. Jack caught up with her, picked up a nearby log, and repeatedly hit her on the head. He then fled the scene, running to the main road in front of the shopping center, where he boarded another bus. The next day, the police took Jack to the woods, where he identified the exact location of the crime scene. Jack also shared specific details with the police, such as the log breaking in half when it hit Christie, which only the perpetrator would know. The police assembled a lineup that included Jack and asked the couple who found Christie to identify the person they saw at the scene on the day of the crime. Both identified Jack. Jack was then formally charged with assault and murder. Although forensic experts found no evidence to confirm his testimony, Jack still confessed to committing sexual assault during the crime. Therefore, the prosecution decided not to dismiss the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty. However, Jack and his attorney opted for a plea bargain. Jack admitted his guilt to the judge, and as a result, he was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial was quick, possibly due to the public interest in the case, with thousands of people following the proceedings. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack Carmen was officially sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, public perception of Jack's guilt began to change. As more information about his confession and personal life emerged in the media, many began to question whether he was truly capable of committing such a crime. Those close to Jack never suspected his involvement in the crime, describing him as a non-aggressive and timid person who often lied when forced to lie. And an incident at a charity center where he took the blame for a broken boiler, even though someone else had done it. Jack's ability to honestly confess to the crime has also been questioned. Although he had significant difficulty speaking, police claimed that Jack provided a detailed description of the crime. However, those who knew Jack's suspect at the police guided him by asking leading questions that included relevant facts from the case. This means that if they asked, "Did you hit the victim with a piece of wood?" and Jack answered, "Yes," it could be misinterpreted as a confession. A woman involved in Jack's treatment revealed that when pressed, Jack would confess to anything. If he was threatened with the electric chair, he would likely comply with whatever the police asked him to do. Those who support Jack's innocence have also found that the police brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, the couple who later identified him at the police station. They had seen Jack and knew he was the suspect. However, the police maintained that the couple had never met Jack, a claim that many found hard to believe. Several other events raised serious doubts about Jack's involvement in the case. Police were unable to find the bus driver or any passengers who could confirm that Jack was on the bus he claimed to have taken home, as stated in his confession. Furthermore, several people at the charity building where Jack lived and worked gave testimony. They reported seeing Jack at 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, it is unlikely that he would have taken the bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of town and committed the murder at 1:50 p.m. He would have had to have taken the bus to the outskirts of town, which would have taken at least 40 minutes. Even if he had left immediately after being seen, the timestamps do not match. This led many to question Jack's guilt and believe that the police pressured him into a false confession. Even Christie's parents began to suspect that Jack was not the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. A public committee was formed to fight for justice. This led to Jack finding new representation, as his new lawyer quickly filed a petition for a review of the case. A few months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt almost from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. Christ's father, Norman Mills, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway, dissatisfied with the police's efforts to find his daughter's killer. Not wanting to rely solely on the police, he took it upon himself to seek answers. Shortly after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the woods, where they discovered a pair of bloody jean shorts and men's underwear. They turned these items over to the police, who initially ignored them during their investigation. However, it remains unknown whether these items were connected to the case or were even tested. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense team had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to identify the real killer. They suspected Henry Newell, the 25-year-old man who had discovered Christ's body along with his wife, as a suspect. When the trial began, Jack's lawyers compiled a long list of reasons to suspect Henry of the murder, and the list continued to grow throughout the trial. Henry initially gained attention for his extensive criminal record. As a teenager, Henry had been in trouble with the law several times, leading to 3 prison terms. Notably, he escaped from prison twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, Henry was serving his 4th prison sentence for arson in order to collect insurance money. Furthermore, when lawyers reviewed the evidence from Christ's case, they discovered several suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry claimed to have discovered the body, approached it, and tossed aside a piece of bloody wood. Although he explained that he was in shock at the time, this action still raised many questions. It is unclear why Henry would have picked up the murder weapon and moved it away from the body without any logical reason. He also claimed that he thought the girl was still alive and tried to save her by taking off his shirt and holding it to her face. This action was also suspicious, as it was unclear whether Henry was actually trying to stop the bleeding or if his shirt had become stained with blood during the killing, causing him to create an alibi for the stains. Jack's lawyer found a store employee at the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said that he was not wearing a shirt but jean shorts. However, when the police arrived, Henry had changed into a different pair of pants. The employee also reported that Henry had a new, obvious bruise on his face, indicating that he had been beaten by someone. When asked why this detail was not disclosed to the police immediately, the employee said that no one asked her specifically about it. The police themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it at the time. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but ended up vomiting into the machine, rendering the test uncompleted. The police did not conduct any further tests. Henry's neighbor was another key witness. He reported seeing fresh scratches on Henry's hands as they spoke on the night of the murder. The neighbor also claimed to have seen a telephone cord in Henry's garage that matched the cord used to tie the victim's hands. Furthermore, the neighbor shared a disturbing story that Henry had told him. Henry claimed that he knew Carol, Christ's 14-year-old friend, and that they had swum naked in the pool together when Henry was 25. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case, as it revealed a disturbing relationship between Henry and Carol. While there was no concrete evidence to support this claim, it did suggest that Henry knew Carol, who was directly involved in the case. His wife Pam also testified in court. She said that everything happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. She explained that the family had gone to the mall and their son had wanted to go for a walk, which led them to the woods where they discovered the body. From that point on, Henry remained at home, only leaving briefly to chase away neighborhood kids who were throwing fireworks into their yard. Henry was brought from jail to testify in court, where he stuck to his original story and maintained his innocence in the case. One of the most important moments of the trial was the playing of the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching the recording, it became clear that Jack had been pressured by the police to confess to the murder. Jack barely spoke and seemed to have no idea what the police wanted from him. However, a more dramatic development occurred on the fifth day of the trial when a surprise witness appeared, a testimony that neither the prosecution nor Jack's attorneys had anticipated. The surprise witness was Henry's stepson, Bobby, and his statements would shock those following the case. The boy explained what had really happened that day. Henry had left the house to scare away some kids who were throwing firecrackers in their yard, but Henry had not only been out for a few minutes as his mother had said. Henry had been gone for more than half an hour. When Henry returned, he had lost his shirt and slippers and had scratches on his face and arms. Henry then spoke privately with Pam before telling Bobby that they were all going to the mall. However, instead of going shopping, Henry and Pam took Bobby to a nearby trail, where he had not asked to go for a walk. In the woods, they found one of Henry's torn slippers, and a little further, they came across Christ's body. Henry's mother told Bobby to keep what he had seen a secret. Years later, after talking to his biological father, Bobby decided it was time to reveal the truth. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange incident involving Henry that occurred at Christ's funeral. On the way back, she said that it was a tragedy, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep quiet." In addition, a friend of Henry's testified that he had confessed to killing Christ. According to this friend, Henry claimed that the act was unintentional, not intentional. In the end, this trial left little doubt that Jack was not involved in the crime, and all charges against him were eventually dropped. But this is where things get interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing the case against him. The prosecutor criticized the police for ignoring many clues and evidence that were available from the beginning of the investigation. This criticism was met with widespread public outrage. As a result, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case 2 days later. However, there was still a major problem. The new investigation relied heavily on the initial findings, including the statements of Henry and Pam. As a result, the police continued to operate under the initial assumption that Christie's body had been discovered in the woods with a long-haired shirtless man nearby. They focused on finding new suspects who fit this description, similar to Jack. Unsurprisingly, this approach yielded no results. Despite months of continued efforts, the case eventually stalled. Christie's father pursued justice relentlessly. He even filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, not because he thought Jack was guilty, but to gain access to the case files. By doing so, he hoped to gather more information about the case. Unfortunately, this effort was ultimately unsuccessful. Christie's father died of cancer in 2006, still without the answers he was looking for. For years, the investigation into Christie's murder went dormant, until 2013 when former attorney John Allard decided to reopen the case. John took the investigation into his own hands and contacted everyone involved, looking for new leads. Christie's family gave him a box full of her father's files, compiled over the years until his death. After reviewing the documents and speaking to dozens of people, John became convinced that the killer was none other than Henry. During the investigation, John discovered that Christie's friend Carol smoked marijuana and found evidence that she had purchased marijuana from Henry. This connection led John to suspect that Carol may have fabricated the story about meeting a DJ in the woods, and that she may have planned to meet Henry to buy marijuana instead. It is possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a convincing excuse. Alternatively, a darker scenario emerged, in which Carol may have acted on Henry's behalf, luring Christie into the woods to attack her. And Henry had scratches and bruises on his body, suggesting that Christie had fought back before she died. As John continued to investigate the case, he discovered that Henry had committed many other crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. Another notable incident involved the death of Henry's wife, Pam, in 1982. Despite filing for divorce, Pam was still living with Henry when she was found dead in their apartment. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills. However, Pam's family members were skeptical and suggested that Henry may have altered the pills. What was even more unusual was that, although Pam had clearly consumed a large amount of sleeping pills, no packaging for the pills was found in the apartment, as she would have been unable to dispose of them after taking such a large amount. In 2013, Henry died of cancer at the age of 63, but John persisted in his quest for justice for Christie. He published a book compiling all the available information about the case, which sparked public interest. Christie's family, along with others, have called for the investigation to be reopened. Notably, some of Henry's relatives contacted John, confessing that their entire family knew Henry was the one who killed Christie but kept quiet. A family member of Henry's recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry gave her a car as a gift and they went for a drive together. At one point, he asked her to stop the car, turned to her and confessed to killing Christie, describing the crime in detail. The woman did not believe him, thinking he had made up the story because he had been drinking heavily. However, after reading a book about the case, the woman's memory of that conversation returned and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. This revelation eventually led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. The police thoroughly reinvestigated the case for several months, re-interviewing many witnesses and re-evaluating potential leads. A significant breakthrough came from Henry's confession to a family member, in which he claimed to have assaulted Christie. Initially, medical experts found no evidence to support this claim. However, using modern technology, police re-examined Christie's clothing and discovered small, previously undetected semen stains. Unfortunately, these stains were too small to extract enough DNA for analysis. The investigation dragged on until late 2015, when police held a press conference to announce their findings. 40 years after the murder, they finally announced that Henry was the one who committed the crime. However, since he was no longer alive, they were unable to take the case to court. As a result, the case was officially declared solved. Although some details of the crime remain unclear due to the lack of a confession, police felt confident that they understood the general circumstances surrounding the murder. It is possible that Henry went to the trail behind the shopping center after leaving his home. Carol may have asked him to meet her there to buy marijuana, but this has not been confirmed. When he arrived, he encountered Christy, who was alone, and decided to attack her. He tied her hands with telephone cords and took her deeper into the woods. Christy defended herself, scratching Henry and hitting him in the face. Henry may have then wrestled her to the ground and killed her with a nearby log. After the attack, Henry returned home and told his wife what had happened. Together, they devised a plan that would allow him to avoid being held accountable for his actions. Carol's involvement in the case remains unclear, and it's possible she will speak out one day. A recent press conference revealed that the police mishandled the case years ago, with the current police apologizing to the Christie family for the negligence of their predecessors. The initial evidence was enough to charge Henry with murder. But it appears the original police chose to ignore it. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father had a military career, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana's life took a major turn when she met Kevin Green at a bar. She was at the bar with her friends when some men started bothering them. He was being aggressive, so Kevin decided to intervene. After Kevin chased the men away, Diana offered to buy him a drink as a thank you. A few days later, they started dating, and things went pretty fast from there. At the time, Kevin was married, but he and his wife were in the process of getting a divorce. Kevin and Diana decided to move in together, and Diana soon became pregnant. As soon as Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married that same day, eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter. They rented an apartment in a small apartment complex in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana had previously worked at her mother's garment factory. However, because she was pregnant, she chose to stay home and prepare for the arrival of her daughter. By the end of September 1979, Diana was close to giving birth and could go into labor at any moment. On the evening of September 30th, after a night of watching a movie together, Diana and her husband had a disagreement. The impending birth of their child was causing them stress, and they were constantly arguing. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby fast food restaurant. About 40 minutes later, Kevin contacted the local police department, reporting a heartbreaking situation. His wife had been shot and needed immediate assistance by ambulance. At that time, a patrol car was nearby and the police quickly arrived at the scene. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed in the bedroom, covered in blood, apparently from a head wound similar to a gunshot wound. The bedroom wall was also covered in blood. Diana was showing signs of life, struggling to breathe, so the police began first aid while they waited for the ambulance. They also asked Kevin to leave the room because they were still unsure of what had happened. When paramedics arrived, they carefully loaded Diana into the ambulance for further medical attention. Initially, the paramedics suspected that Diana had been shot, but it was later determined that her injuries were actually blunt force trauma. Kevin wanted to go with his wife, but the police would not allow it. They needed him to give a statement, and at that time, they were investigating every possible scenario, including the possibility that Kevin was involved in the attack. Kevin, in shock, did not understand what the police were saying, even tried to get into the ambulance that was leaving, forcing the police to intervene and stop him. Kevin regained his composure and then explained the events of that night to the police. He had an argument with his wife and decided to leave the apartment to calm down. He drove to a fast food restaurant to buy some burgers. As he left the apartment, he realized he had left his keys inside but decided not to go back to get them. Instead, He closed the door and walked to his car. While driving, he noticed a truck nearby with the back door open. Kevin reported seeing an African-American man parking the truck near their apartment complex. At around 2 a.m., Kevin decided to stop by his favorite fast food joint, but the line was too crowded, which discouraged him. So he chose another location of the same chain nearby. About 40 minutes later, after buying some burgers, he arrived home to find the front door wide open. This was unusual. Kevin rushed inside and heard strange noises. When he entered the bedroom, he was shocked to see Diana lying in a pool of blood and struggling to breathe. Kevin immediately called the police for help. Kevin's story was somewhat confusing and raised many questions. Going out for a burger in the middle of the night seemed unusual. It took him about 40 minutes to make the trip, which was quite long considering all the restaurants were close to his home. The police checked the fast food bag and found the food was still warm. The receipt contained the restaurant's address and time of purchase, which matched Kevin's account. After verifying this, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but first, they requested a blood sample to compare with traces of blood found at the crime scene. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors examined her head wound and determined that it was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it appeared that her attacker had used a small, heavy object, such as a piece of wood, to hit her multiple times. Diana soon fell into a coma at the hospital, prompting doctors to work urgently to save both her and her unborn child. After several tense hours, they were able to stabilize Diana, but she still needed surgery. During this time, the police asked medical professionals to evaluate whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The examination was part of standard investigative procedures, and the position in which Diana was found prompted the police to consider the possibility. Experts confirmed that there were traces of semen on her body. However, Kevin told the police that he had had sex with Diana just hours before the argument, and that DNA analysis results were not yet available at that time. Therefore, even with a biological sample from the perpetrator, there was not much that could be done. Kevin and Diana's family waited anxiously at the hospital overnight, hoping that Diana and her baby would pull through. However, in a tragic turn of events, the baby's condition suddenly worsened the next morning. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save the baby. Diana underwent emergency surgery shortly after the baby's death and her condition stabilized. Although she remained in a coma, chances of survival were relatively high. And the medical team hope that she can recover and return to normal life after such a serious injury. Meanwhile, the police are trying to identify the person who attacked Diana. After the baby's death, the case was reclassified as a homicide, causing the local police department to allocate all available resources to solve the case. Although Kevin provided an alibi, the police were not quick to rule him out as a suspect. His story raised many questions. He had argued with his wife just hours before the attack, left the front door unlocked, and was absent for an extended period of time during a trip to the fast food restaurant. However, there was no evidence against Kevin. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near his home in the middle of the night led the police to another suspect. About a year before this case, crimes with a similar modus operandi began occurring in and around Tustin. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was the victim of a fatal break-in and assault. The perpetrator broke into her apartment, beat her with a wooden object, and sexually assaulted her. 4 months later, a similar case occurred. A 21-year-old woman was killed in her own home after being beaten with a piece of wood by an intruder. In July 1979, an unknown perpetrator broke into another woman's apartment and did the same to her, her injuries leaving her in a coma for several weeks. She eventually recovered. However, her testimony did not provide any new leads for the police to catch the perpetrator. In September 1979, less than a month before Diana's attack, a similar series of events occurred to a 31-year-old woman who died the following day. All of the cases had striking similarities, leading the police to suspect that they were dealing with a serial killer, similar to the one who attacked Diana. The police focused all their efforts on capturing this individual, who had earned the nickname the Bedroom Destroyer. Due to the short time between the cases and the fact that the perpetrator was operating in a relatively small suburb of Los Angeles, the police believed that he might strike again soon. The police decided to issue a public warning through the media, warning all women living alone, especially those living in ground-floor apartments, as they appeared to be the serial killer's primary targets. The announcement caused widespread panic, prompting many women to purchase self-defense products, sign up for self-defense classes, and temporarily move in with friends or family for safety. The police interviewed anyone who might have had any connection to the crimes, and they soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was vague, the police found several men who matched and investigated them, but got nowhere. 7 days after Diana was attacked, doctors updated her family on her condition. She had regained consciousness, but unfortunately, her recovery was fraught with complications. Diana was unable to speak or recall her memories because her brain functioned at the level of a normal 6-year-old. Her brain needed time to recover. During this time, a similar incident occurred in Tustin. A 24-year-old woman was brutally attacked in her apartment by an unknown assailant, who beat her with a wooden object and sexually assaulted her. Sadly, the woman's injuries were fatal. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to arrest the perpetrator. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind gradually returned to normal. Despite this progress, she still struggled with severe memory loss and could not remember her parents. Doctors informed her family that her memory might recover over time, but they advised against reminding her of anything and instead letting her remember on her own once her health stabilized. When Diana was well enough, she was discharged and her family took her home. Because Kevin had to continue working on the military base to support the family financially, they decided to move in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 6 weeks after the attack, Diana was still attending physical therapy sessions and her condition was gradually improving. She still couldn't speak or remember what had happened to her, but that all changed suddenly 6 weeks after the attack. When her therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana remembered anything about her attacker, Diana responded in surprise, nodding and pointing to her wedding ring, a sudden revelation that took her doctor by surprise. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack and that the perpetrator was none other than her husband. For the detective, this completely changed the course of the case. He and his team were almost certain that Diana was attacked by the same serial criminal responsible for the other similar attacks. But now the detective faced several questions. Could Kevin be the bedroom basher? He lived in the same area where the attacks happened and even matched the description provided by several witnesses who saw a white man with dark hair. Or did Kevin decide to get rid of his wife by disguising himself as the active killer? Considering that all the actions of the bedroom basher were almost identical each single time, it wouldn't have been difficult. The detective thought that if he arrested Kevin now, his involvement in other crimes might never be proven, and Kevin himself could flee as soon as he realized he was caught. So he made a difficult decision. He asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana still remembered nothing and to return home to Kevin. This was obviously a huge challenge for both of them, but they agreed nonetheless. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance and closely monitored all his movements, hoping to eventually link him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friends to learn more about the suspect. And they quickly found out something interesting. Those who knew him well said that his relationship with Diana was quite tense. The couple argued frequently, a fact also confirmed by neighbors who often heard their screams. According to friends, Kevin regularly complained to them that Diana refused to be intimate with him in the final months of her pregnancy. Yet Kevin had described his relationship with Diana to detectives as nearly perfect. But besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else and didn't raise any suspicions. The police also received results from the lab revealing an interesting discovery. Besides the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the blood type of the attacker to Kevin's blood sample, and it matched. It meant that Kevin had the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this information, detectives came up with the most likely version of what had happened on that fateful night. Kevin indeed bought burgers at a fast food joint a few miles from home. The time on the receipt and cashier's words confirmed his presence. So, the detectives believed he could have attacked Diana before leaving home, then quickly went to the fast food restaurant to create an alibi explaining the extended 40-minute trip. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger. Despite Kevin's claim that they had had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends about Diana's reluctance for months. Given the severity of the attack, detectives believed this was Kevin's breaking point. The police re-interviewed Diana, who confirmed she vividly remembered the attack and that Kevin was indeed the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin. The police decided to arrest Kevin without arresting him at Diana's home to avoid endangering her family. Instead, they arrested him at a store. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence, claiming that everything happened exactly as he told them. As the trial proceeded, preparations took nearly 10 months to complete. During this time, Diana's health gradually improved, allowing her to regain her ability to speak, albeit with some difficulty. Diana was examined by multiple doctors, all of whom agreed that her brain had recovered and that she was now a credible witness. In court, Diana positively identified her husband as her attacker that night. However, Kevin's defense team argued that he was innocent, claiming that he was at a fast food restaurant at the time of the incident. Unfortunately for Kevin, Diana's testimony was stronger than his alibi, resulting in a guilty verdict. As a result, in November 1980, Kevin was convicted of murdering his child and assaulting Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the wake of Kevin's possible involvement in the serial killings, the police noticed something interesting. Before Kevin was arrested, there had been 2 more similar cases in their county. But both victims survived. They had not yet been able to identify the attacker, so his identity remained unknown. But after Kevin was arrested, the attack suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom wrecker had committed crimes quite frequently, sometimes only a few weeks apart. However, after Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar cases. After the verdict, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin did not object. Diana then focused on recovering her health, but her progress was slow due to the severity of her injuries. She lost some of her hearing and vision, and she was having difficulty speaking. Meanwhile, Kevin never gave up on his claim of innocence, even after many years had passed. However, life in prison was extremely difficult for him. Fellow inmates often targeted him because he was convicted of murdering a child, which led to him being hospitalized several times. Kevin applied for parole but was denied by the board. He continued to receive 3 more denials in the following years. The main reason for these decisions was Kevin's refusal to plead guilty, which was seen as a lack of remorse. When DNA analysis became a standard tool in forensic science, Kevin requested that his DNA be compared to existing samples. However, his request was denied because he could not afford the analysis. In 1996, the police department reopened the investigation into a series of attacks believed to have been committed by the bedroom basher. During this time, semen samples taken from the victims' bodies were stored in a laboratory. Now, the police had a chance to identify the perpetrator behind all of these crimes. Kevin was still considered the prime suspect, but DNA analysis revealed something surprising. When experts compared the DNA profile, the semen samples matched the DNA of another man, a man named Gerald Parker. Gerald was arrested the same year as Kevin. His crime involved the attack on a 13-year-old girl in Tustin, and he was arrested shortly thereafter. Initially, the police did not link this case to the other series of attacks because of the different attack methods. The bedroom basher typically targeted his victims at night while they were in their apartments, while Parker attacked the girl on the street. He has since served his sentence in prison and is expected to be released in a few days. After police got a DNA match for Gerald in the unsolved cases, they re-examined the Diana attack. Although the crime was considered solved, police still considered Diana's case to be connected to the serial killer cases. They now understood that Kevin was definitely not a serial killer, leaving them with only one question: did he really attack his wife? Gerald was stationed at the same military base as Kevin and owned a dark-colored truck during that time. Notably, on the day of the incident, Kevin reported to police that he saw an African-American man near a dark-colored truck outside their home. This statement led police to consider the possibility that Parker may have been involved in the attack on Diana. The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher murder investigation. During the visit, the prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a direct DNA sample for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While the experts were analyzing Kevin's DNA, the police went to see Gerald in prison. At that time, they had not yet charged him with the series of attacks, because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. However, the police decided to talk to Gerald, hoping that he might confess. Gerald initially denied any involvement in the series of crimes. To get more information, the police changed the subject and asked him about the attack on Diana. Before proceeding with the interrogation, they reviewed his file and discovered an important detail. After being arrested for attacking the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The police took advantage of this information, questioning how he could have let another soldier take responsibility for his crimes. They continued to pressure him by appealing to his loyalty to the army. This strategy eventually yielded a breakthrough when Gerald surprisingly revealed that another man was actually serving time for the murder he had committed. Gerald admitted that he had driven to Kevin's house in his truck that night. His intention was to explore the neighborhood in his truck, looking into ground floor windows for potential victims, as he had done many times before. However, when he arrived, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when a man walked out, Gerald noticed that the man had left the door unlocked when he left. After waiting for a few minutes, Gerald entered the apartment and attacked Diana. He said he had not known Diana's husband before, as they had been on different assignments at the military base. Gerald confessed to several crimes, including 6 murders and 3 non-fatal assaults, in addition to the crimes for which Kevin had been wrongly convicted. DNA testing confirmed Gerald's guilt and Kevin's innocence, supporting Gerald's confession. The prosecutor promised to overturn his conviction as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin was released after 16 years in prison. The development caused public outrage, not only because an innocent man had been wrongly imprisoned for nearly half his life, but also because it took the police so long to identify the real culprit. After Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in restitution. A few years later, he received an additional $100 per day payment for his time in prison, totaling $620,000. But the story doesn't end there. Even though Kevin was completely exonerated, Diana still refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed that Kevin was the only one who attacked her. However, after biological material from her body matched Gerald's DNA, she came up with a different story. Diana said she was attacked and assaulted by Kevin, who then left, followed by Gerald. However, Gerald claimed that when he entered the apartment, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. And he admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family offered another explanation. Kevin may have colluded with Gerald to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house with the door open. Gerald, on the other hand, repeatedly denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was home to many people who did not know each other. Kevin also insisted that he had nothing to do with Gerald and vowed that he would never harm Diana or their unborn child. He insisted that his only mistake was leaving the door open because he did not want to go back to get the keys immediately after an argument with his wife, a decision that still haunts him. Diana maintained her version of events, and one reason may have been the severe trauma she suffered during the attack. The trauma had a profound impact on her brain. When Diana awoke from her coma, doctors advised her family not to inform her of what had happened, as her brain was extremely sensitive to new information at that time. She would treat any details provided as real and accurate memories. It is worth noting that even at the time of Kevin's release, 16 years after the incident, she continued to experience severe post-traumatic stress. This suggests that the effects of the trauma had affected her brain beyond repair. It is also possible that the trauma was the main reason she convicted Kevin of involvement. Gerald Parker was sentenced to death in 1999, but the death penalty has not yet been carried out. Instead, due to California's moratorium on the death penalty, Gerald remains in prison to serve his sentence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a family with two older brothers. Although Debbie's parents divorced when she was young, but her father always gave her love and care. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family resided in a small apartment building, in a quiet neighborhood nearby a military base. Debbie was a happy and outgoing child who enjoyed socializing with friends, playing basketball, and collecting dolls, which she would often spend hours playing with. On January 13, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie had dinner with her family. Afterward, her mother asked her to go to the nearby laundromat, a task she had done many times before. Debbie's job was to supervise the laundry while it washed. A family member would accompany her to the laundromat to help carry the clothes, but they would return home, leaving Debbie to wait for the wash cycle to finish. The laundromat was just across the street from their home, so her mother is not too worried. It was a common practice at the time for children to help with household chores, like laundry. In fact, Debbie had even made friends with other girls she met at the laundromat. Her mother wants to let Debbie's brother go with her that day, but he wasn't feeling well and preferred to stay home and watch his favorite TV show. Her mom then asked her husband to take the laundry instead, and Debbie accompanied him, bringing a box of detergent along the way. When they arrived, her stepdad unloaded the laundry into 2 washing machines and then left. Debbie stayed behind to wait for the wash cycle to finish. Once it was done, she planned to walk home and ask someone to come back and pick up the clean clothes, as she wasn't strong enough to carry them all by herself. After a while, Debbie's mom realized she hadn't returned home, despite the fact that the laundry had been finished. As the sun started to set, She and her husband decided to look for Debbie. They walked to the laundromat but didn't find her there. A staff member told them that Debbie had left a while ago, and she hadn't returned yet. Getting concerned, Debbie's mom and her husband, Roy, started searching the surrounding streets for her. During their search, they noticed something unusual. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot, detergent had been spilled next to one of the cars. This caught her attention because Debbie had been carrying a box of detergent. Her mom immediately suspected that the spilled detergent might be connected to Debbie's disappearance. They continued to search the parking lot and the surrounding area for Debbie, but no other signs of her were found. Neighbors who were familiar with Debbie's family joined the search, but despite their efforts, no progress was made. Debbie's mother decided to call the police. Officers checked the area in the parking lot where the detergent had been spilled. The police noticed a new lead near a parked car close to the detergent. Multiple clear fingerprints were visible on the car door, just inches away from the spilled detergent. What caught their attention was that the fingerprints looked fresh, and they were located very low to the door handle, which raised suspicions. The police suspected that an unknown person may have taken Debbie and touched the car in the process, leaving the fingerprints behind. The police collected the fingerprints and handed them over to forensic experts for analysis. At the same time, the police began searching for the car's owner to determine whether the fingerprints belonged to them or an unknown person. The police began searching the streets for additional clues or witnesses. The laundromat employee reported that she had not noticed anything unusual. According to her, Debbie had been waiting for her laundry to finish and then left the building with a box of detergent, likely heading home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. However, it was not long before the police found their first key witness, whose statement would change the direction of the investigation. Sandra, a 12 years old, was walking to the laundromat with her friend to do some laundry. As they approached the laundromat, they witnessed a disturbing scene. A man grabbed a girl from the street and pulled her into his parked car near the laundromat. The girl struggled to free herself and screamed, but the man quickly got into the driver's seat and sped away. In the process, he almost hit Sandra and her friend. One of them shouted after the car as it drove off, but it was too late. At the time, Sandra didn't think much of the incident, assuming the man was the girl's father or a relative picking her up. She didn't report the incident to the police or tell any adults about what she had seen. A crucial witness came forward after learning about Debbie's abduction, providing investigators with vital information. The witness reported that the perpetrator's vehicle was a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a 1957 model. She described the driver as a young white male with thick, dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Additionally, another girl who lived in the same building as Debbie shared her own observations from that evening. As she stood outside her apartment, a dark pickup truck drove by, initially her think it was her uncle behind the wheel. However, when the driver stopped in front of her and made eye contact, she realized it was not her uncle. A woman gave investigators a detailed description of a suspect, a white man in his 30s with medium-length dark hair. After gathering more information, they discovered another important witness who lived near the victim's house. The witness nearly collided with a dark pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, which was driving erratically. The driver, around 30 years old with dark hair, was recklessly maneuvering the vehicle. What caught the witness's attention was a girl inside the truck, desperately trying to escape while being restrained by the driver's one hand. The police distributed information about the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and had police artists create a sketch based on the descriptions provided by the three witnesses. The search was divided into two main directions, with some officers searching for similar vehicles and verifying the owners, while others focused on locating Debbie. Each day, the search operation grew, with more volunteers and police officers from neighboring towns joining in. Approximately 4,000 people participated in the large-scale search operation, a record-setting number for both the city and the state. Meanwhile, detectives investigated Debbie's acquaintances, including her male neighbors, stepfather, and biological father. However, after the investigation, all of them were ruled out as suspects. Debbie's father, who lived in the same city, was informed of his daughter's disappearance and immediately joined the search. Detectives searched for Debbie by checking the backgrounds of previously convicted criminals living nearby, but they didn't find any suspects. Despite 2 weeks of searching, no leads were found. On January 29th, students joined the search and were tasked with searching a wooded area close to Debbie's home. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students found footprints leading off the trail and into the forest, indicating that something had been dragged. Following the tracks 150 feet into the woods, the students stumbled upon a human body. They immediately contacted the officers, and they quickly confirmed that the body was Debbie Randall. She was wearing a lavender dress and a dark blue zip-up jacket with a hood, matching the description provided by her mother on the day she went missing. However, her new lavender shoes, a Christmas gift she had received just weeks earlier and was particularly fond of, were missing. She still had her socks on, but her shoes were nowhere to be found. Debbie's body was examined by medical experts, who concluded that she died from strangulation and had also been assaulted sex. A single dark hair was found on her body, which likely belonged to the killer. However, since DNA analysis was not available at that time, this evidence could not be further analyzed. The experts used a microscope to examine the hair and made a guess, based on their knowledge at the time, that it belonged to a man between 18 and 30 years old. Debbie's clothing was contaminated with dirt, which, in the absence of other leads, detectives decided to scrutinize more closely. They consulted a geologist who worked with the forensic team to analyze the dirt. The results showed that some of the dirt was a specific type of clay, which was from a location less than 10 miles from the city. Further examination confirmed that this clay was the unique Northern Georgia clay. Additionally, distinct dirt stains from another type of clay were discovered, originating from a local mining site just 2 miles from the location of the body. Detectives developed a theory about the incident surrounding Debbie's death. They believed that the perpetrator did not kill she immediately. Instead, they think the perpetrator first drove she to a remote area outside of town where they sexually assaulted her. The perpetrator then drove to another location where they killed Debbie. After her death, the perpetrator transported his body to a forest and leaving it there. This theory is supported by evidences, including clay samples and forensic analysis, which suggest that Debbie was already dead when her body was brought to the forest. The absence of signs of a struggle in the forest area also lends credibility to this theory. The locations of the clay mining sites were remote and difficult to access, suggesting that the killer might have familiarized themselves with the area through work. A mining company supervisor confirmed that the area was hard to navigate even for experienced workers, making the possibility that a stranger could take Debbie there impossible. Police investigated employees from both companies, searching for a man matching the description suspects or someone with a similar car, but this investigation did not produce any leads. They also found fingerprints on the car near the abduction site, which they compared to those of all suspects, but unfortunately, this did not yield any results. The news of Debbie's brutal murder sent shockwaves throughout the city, drawing thousands to her funeral to pay their respects. Despite the local police department's relentless pursuit of justice, the case hit numerous roadblocks, leaving investigators with no new leads for years. The case went cold, but detectives continued to work tirelessly, scrutinizing dozens of suspects yet struggling to establish their involvement. For lead detective Morris Nix, who was just 19 when the case began and has been involved from the start, solving Debbie's murder has become his primary motivation. He pursued multiple leads and suspects over the years, carefully evaluating the evidence and eventually narrowing down the list to 4 men he considered the most likely suspects. The FBI created a DNA database, and experts were able to obtain the perpetrator's genetic profile from a hair found on Debbie's body. The DNA was added to the database, but no matches were found. This suggests that the killer had either never committed a serious crime before or their DNA had not been collected by authorities yet. 43 years after the murder, in 2015, detectives reopened the case and decided to reanalyze Debbie's clothing using advanced technology, as the items had been stored in the evidence warehouse all that time. Experts discovered biological material from a man on the evidence. Debbie's mother spent decades hoping to see her daughter's killer caught and brought to justice. In a 2018 interview, she revealed the pain of living in an apartment where there were many memories of her daughter. Although she eventually moved to a new city, the lack of progress in the case weighed heavily on her for years. When she gets old, her one wish was to see the case resolved before she passed away. Sadly, she passed away from cancer at 78, just weeks after the interview, and her wish was left unfulfilled. She was laid to rest beside her daughter. In 2019, the local police department received extra funding, allowing them to conduct a more detailed analysis of Debbie's clothes. The experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was also interviewed, sharing that he thought about Debbie every day over the decades. He held on to a box of her old photos, hoping to reunite with her in heaven. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, just after the interview. In 2022, detectives focused on the case, following their one lead, DNA. They contacted a Florida company that specialized in genetic genealogy, an innovative DNA analysis method. The police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years. Using these samples, experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and searched for his relatives in genetic databases. To identify the killer, investigators exhaustively examined thousands of using genetic genealogy, then they focused on one family in Marietta. In 2023, the family members willingly provided DNA samples, which helped investigators establish a familial connection to the killer. The results confirmed that the killer was a close relative of this family. After conducting a more thorough investigation, experts were able to identify one person, William Rose, could be the owner of the DNA sample. However, Rose had died by in 1974, 2 years after the murder. Undeterred, detectives sought to finally resolve the case and obtained a warrant to exhume William's remains, enabling experts to collect a direct DNA sample. After 51 years, police finally discovered the identity of Debbie's killer. William Rose, who was 24 years old at the time, matched the DNA evidence and was revealed to be the perpetrator. Notably, William had never been a suspect in the investigation. Further research showed that his relatives lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he often visited them. Investigators believe this frequent contact likely gave him multiple opportunities to see Debbie. On the evening of the murder, it's possible that William was heading to visit his relatives, and he encountered Debbie leaving the laundromat. According to witness testimonies, William pulled his vehicle into the parking lot between Debbie's house and the laundromat. He left the engine running, exited his vehicle, grabbed Debbie, and drove north. The direction of his escape led police to suspect that he may have immediately driven to a nearby clay quarry. Notably, William had no other serious criminal offenses on record. It is unclear whether he committed other crimes that went undetected or if Debbie's murder was an isolated incident. By the time the case was solved, the only living close relative of Debbie was her older brother, Melvin. He attended a press conference where the identification of the culprit was announced and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving his younger sister's case after more than 50 years. Melvin also shared that he wished his mother had lived to see this moment, but he took comfort in believing that she was now reunited with Debbie in heaven. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Tara Baker. Tara Louise Baker was born on January 20th, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. Her parents got divorced when she was a child, and her mother later married again. Tara had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister, making her the eldest of 4 siblings. From an early age, Tara showed a strong interest in the law and aspired to be a lawyer or judge. She demonstrated this by conducting mock trials with her stuffed animals, creating contracts with family members, and she also writing letters to politicians. She even wrote to the President of the United States once to complain about his speech interrupting her favorite TV show. After graduating from high school, Tara attended Georgia College, where she earned 2 bachelor's degrees in just 3 years, graduating early. She then enrolled at the University of Georgia in 1999 to pursue further education. The university, located in Athens, was one of the top law schools in the country and was conveniently close to her parents' home. Just a few hours away. Because not wanting to live in a dorm again, Tara opted for off-campus housing. She rented a room in a house that was divided into 3 separate rooms, sharing the space with 2 other university students, one of whom was a familiar face from her college days. Tara was employed at a respected law firm in downtown Athens, which enabled her to pay her living expenses and gain valuable work experience in her chosen field. In January 2001, at the age of 23 and in her second year of studies, Tara spent a significant amount of time at the university library. The evening of January 18th followed this pattern. She and a friend went to the library, where they studied for several hours. Around 7:30 p.m., her friend left for home, but Tara chose to stay longer. At about 9:46 p.m., Tara called her friend to check that she had arrived home safely and mentioned her intention to leave the library in a few minutes. The next day, Virginia Baker, Tara's mother, got a phone call. The caller claimed to be a detective and asked if Tara had ever been arrested, explaining they needed her fingerprints. Virginia initially thought it was a prank call and hung up. But then she called the Athens police station to verify. They confirmed the caller was a real detective and told her there had been a fire at Tara's house. Virginia, still confused, asked to speak to Tara. The detective said they couldn't locate her and had found an unidentified body in the house, which is why they needed Tara's fingerprints. At the crime scene, investigators searched for evidence, but the room was badly damaged from the fire and water. It was later discovered that some items that survived the fire were not checked for fingerprints. Tara's laptop was missing from her room, which was unusual since it was a bulky item and other valuables were left untouched. This raised suspicions that the motive might not have been a robbery gone wrong. With no signs of forced entry, investigators suspected that Tara may have known her killer and let them in. The detective provided more information, stating that only one of Tara's roommates had been located so far, and that person was not at home when the fire occurred. However, the other roommate and Tara herself remained unaccounted for, leading investigators to suspect that the unidentified body might be one of them. When Virginia asked the detective to describe the room where the body was discovered, the response left her stunned. The detective explained that the room was packed with antique items, which was consistent with Tara's long-standing hobby of collecting such things. Tara's family rushed to Athens, hoping that the situation was a misunderstanding and that Tara was safe. Upon arrival at the police station, they were left waiting for hours without receiving any updates. Eventually, a detective met with them and delivered devastating news. The body found in the house was Tara's, and she had been murdered, not a victim of the fire. The detective, claiming exhaustion, declined to answer their questions at that time. However, before departing, he revealed that Tara had unknowingly left behind a crucial piece of evidence, fragments of the perpetrator's skin under her fingernails, which could potentially aid in identifying the killer. Tara's relatives were shocked and devastated by the news of her murder. The police refused to provide them with more information, despite their repeated pleas. Desperate for answers, the family made multiple attempts to contact the police, but were continually rebuffed. In fact, the police department never reached out to the family on their own, forcing Tara's relatives to repeatedly call and visit the station to gather scraps of information. Over time, they were able to slowly piece together some details of what had occurred. Tara's family discovered that firefighters may have inadvertently destroyed crucial evidence while extinguishing the blaze, a common occurrence in such situations. The firefighters' primary objective was to put out the fire and potentially rescue survivors, unaware that a murder victim was inside. Furthermore, the investigators failed to secure the crime scene after finding the body, allowing unauthorized access to the area. As Tara's relatives sought information, they faced resistance from the police, who were unwilling to keep them informed about the investigation. The family was also subjected to rudeness and unprofessional behavior from the authorities. In an effort to document their interactions, they began recording conversations with the police and filed complaints against local investigators, but this did not yield any results. The family decided to investigate Tara's death on their own and enlisted the help of a well-known criminologist. However, the local police department would only share case materials with him if he agreed to keep all information and findings confidential, even from Tara's family. For 10 years, the family was unable to obtain Tara's death certificate. They finally received it after writing to the state governor. But the certificate did not provide a detailed cause of death, only stating multiple injuries. Determining the exact time of death was difficult. Medical experts estimated it to be between 10 p.m., when Tara left the library, and 11 a.m., when neighbors called the fire department. However, it is likely that the crime occurred closer to the morning hours, as the fire did not take long to spread. The police investigation found witnesses who reported seeing a middle-aged white man running down the street on the morning of the murder. He was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which was unusual given the winter weather. Additionally, the police discovered that a few days before the murder, a man who sounded heavily intoxicated called Tara's university and asked for her phone number. The university had a phone number that students and faculty could call to request student information, such as phone numbers. The intoxicated-sounding man was only able to write down Tara's phone number correctly on his 8th attempt. The investigation into Tara's murder raised several suspicions, but the identity of the man involved remained unknown. At the time of her death, Tara was in a relationship with a boyfriend. Despite his confirmed alibi, the police were hesitant to clear him of suspicion. They continued to scrutinize him, making late-night calls to him and his parents, requesting that he travel to a nearby city for further questioning, DNA sampling, or a polygraph test. Notably, it was Tara's boyfriend who was tasked with identifying her body. He had been living in another city but promptly arrived in Athens upon learning of the fire, even though Tara's parents were already present in town. When the police asked the boyfriend to identify the body, they took him to the house but did not let him enter. A police officer went inside, took a photo of the body, and showed it to the boyfriend on the camera screen. The boyfriend was shocked and said he could not be certain if it was Tara. He mentioned that he had given her earrings, and if he saw them, he would know for sure. The officer went back inside, removed the earrings from the body, and showed them to the boyfriend. Only after seeing the earrings did the boyfriend confirm that the body was Tara's. The police then focused on another man, a student in Tara's classes with a troubling reputation. Several female students came forward and reported that this individual would often ask girls out on dates and not accept no as an answer. He had also asked Tara out multiple times, despite knowing she had a boyfriend. Some girls reported that he exhibited creepy behavior, making them feel uneasy. Despite investigating this person, detectives couldn't find any evidence connecting him to the crime. In a contentious move, they even asked Tara's friends to monitor him, but it yielded no results. Investigators also considered another suspect, an attorney at Tara's workplace. They discovered that just before the murder, he began acting strangely. This attorney had been part of a close-knit group of colleagues who regularly socialized outside of work. But he abruptly stopped participating in their gatherings. Moreover, just days before the incident, he had informed Tara that he would be unable to attend her birthday celebration, which was set to take place the day after the murder. On January 19th, before the fire began, one of Tara's colleagues attempted to persuade him to change his mind and attend the celebration, as Tara valued their friendship and was hurt by his sudden refusal. The colleague visited his office but found him absent, which was unusual given that his workday had already started. He was typically present in the office during morning hours, but not on that particular day. The colleague also checked his schedule, wondering if he had meetings, but it was empty. He failed to show up to work that day, but the following day, he visited another colleague's house and acted strangely. Many people who knew the attorney suspected he regularly used illicit substances, which may have contributed to his erratic behavior. However, another detail raised more suspicion. His colleague noticed several fresh scratches on his neck. It was previously discovered that skin particles from the perpetrator were found under Tara's nails, indicating she likely scratched her attacker. The attorney claimed the scratches on his neck came from a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. His behavior became even more bizarre when asked who he thought committed the crime. He suddenly became agitated, shouting that it was Tara's father, but failed to provide any explanation or evidence to support this accusation. A further unusual circumstance was the sudden resignation of the attorney a few months after the murder, followed by his departure from the state. It remains unclear if the police ever compared his DNA to the samples found under the victim's fingernails or if these samples were even analyzed. As with other aspects of the investigation, the detectives did not disclose any information, not even to Tara's family. Subsequent police findings revealed that the attorney had been discreetly involved with two female colleagues from his workplace, despite the fact that he got married. This discovery could potentially explain his peculiar behavior and unexplained absences from work. Additionally, both women claimed they were certain he was using illegal substances. Police found no evidence linking the lawyer to the murder, clearing him as a suspect. A maintenance company with access to a spare key was also questioned, but yielded no results. The case has seen little progress, with authorities keeping investigation details confidential to avoid impeding progress. Over time, several potential leads emerged in the case. A witness came forward claiming to have seen an African-American man outside Tara's house a few hours before the fire. Another person mentioned noticing blood on a notebook belonging to one of Tara's university classmates shortly after the murder. Despite investigating these leads, police were unable to make any progress. Tara's parents offered a $77,000 reward for any information that could help solve the case. However, as the years passed, the team of detectives working on the case changed multiple times, and the new investigators were unable to crack the case. The primary challenge was the lack of evidence, as the fire and the subsequent actions of the firefighters destroyed nearly all potential evidence in Tara's room. In 2019, a podcast covering Tara's 19-year-old murder case was released, bringing together her family, key individuals, and all known information about the crime. This sparked renewed interest and caught the attention of the police department, who began communicating more with Tara's family. As a result, the police re-examined the case, although no new breakthroughs were made. The podcast continued to cover Tara's story for 2 years, ultimately having a substantial impact on the case's progression. The Georgia government introduced a bill to reduce the number of unsolved cases in the state, partly due to Tara's case. The bill was named after Tara and Rhonda Coleman, an 18-year-old woman from Georgia who was murdered in 1990 and whose killer remains unknown. Although the two murders are unrelated, the initiative was called the Coleman-Baker Bill. In 2023, the bill passed unanimously, and the governor signed it in Athens, accompanied by the families of both victims. The law created a special unit within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to focus on unsolved cases. It also gave victims' families the right to ask police to re-examine these cases and take new steps to solve them. After the law passed in 2023, a unit was formed to investigate Tara's murder. Detectives re-reviewed all available information and re-examined the limited evidence using modern DNA analysis. This process took several months until a breakthrough was announced at a press conference on May 13, 2024. After 23 years, police revealed that the perpetrator had been caught. The culprit was identified as 48-year-old Edric Lamont Faust. Investigators did not reveal the exact methods used to identify him, but stated that advanced DNA analysis and biological evidence were crucial in the process. To avoid compromising the ongoing legal case, they withheld specific details, which will be disclosed during the trial. The arrest documents listed multiple charges against Edric, including assault, which may have allowed for a DNA match. Additionally, skin cells found under the victim's nails may have been analyzed using modern tools to extract the killer's DNA. As for Edric, his extensive criminal record, which included numerous arrests for various offenses, should have put him in the FBI database long ago. At the time of Tara's murder, Edric was 25 years old and lived in the same city as the victim. However, the police found no evidence to suggest that Edric knew Tara, leading them to believe he may have broken into her home or tricked her into letting him in. Edric was not a suspect in the case until a few days before his arrest, when new DNA analysis methods brought him to the attention of detectives. He is currently in jail awaiting trial. The evidence the police have against him will be revealed during the trial process. The fact that Edric was denied bail suggests that the detectives have obtained conclusive DNA evidence. The police are certain that Edric is responsible for Tara's murder, and as a result, her case is now officially closed. There is currently no verdict for Edric. He was charged with 1 count of premeditated murder, 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of burglary, 2 counts of aggravated sodomy, 1 count of rape, 1 count of aggravated assault, first-degree arson, and possession of a knife during the commission of a felony. Tara's family finally has closure after 23 years of searching for the truth. They expressed gratitude to the new team of detectives who helped solve her case. In contrast, Rhonda Coleman's case, which the law is also named after, remains unsolved. However, her family may now feel hopeful that new evidence will be uncovered and justice will be served, just like in Tara's case. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992 in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a loving family with 2 brothers and an older sister. As a child, Mitzi was very cheerful and energetic. She loved playing outdoors with her friends and spending time with her siblings. Mitzi was independent from a young age. When she started elementary school, her parents let her walk to school with her brother and they did not need an adult to accompany them. Fortunately, the school was close to their home and most of the way to school was on busy roads, making it safer for them to get to school. August 10, 2000 was Mitzi's 8th birthday and her family prepared a party to celebrate this special day. However, her school did not allow students to miss school on their birthdays. When Mitzi asked her mother if she could miss school on her birthday, her mother refused. Mitzi was very upset about this, and around 7:30 a.m., she left home with her brother. After school, Mitzi had to wait for her brother so they could walk home together. However, when her brother got out of school, he couldn't find his sister anywhere. Thinking that his sister had walked home by herself, he went home alone, but it turned out that Mitzi wasn't home. Mitzi's older sister was home at the time, and she noticed that her younger sister Mitzi hadn't come home yet, which seemed unusual, especially since it was Mitzi's birthday today and she was really looking forward to her birthday party. She waited for a while, hoping that Mitzi would eventually show up. At 4 p.m., her older sister became worried and called their mother to inform her of Mitzi's absence. Their mother quickly contacted Mitzi's school and found out that Mitzi had attended all of her classes that day. The mother then contacted other family members and friends of Mitzi, but no one had seen Mitzi since she left school. Mitzi's relatives became concerned and began searching for her. Family, friends, and neighbors joined in the effort, quickly organizing a large-scale search campaign. Some volunteers walked the streets, while others canvassed the neighborhood, going door to door along the route from Mitzi's home to her school, asking if anyone had seen her. Flyers with information about the girl were also printed and distributed. However, despite these extensive efforts, no one had any news of Mitzi, prompting her parents to contact the 911 emergency services. The police immediately joined the search for Mitzi, and local media began reporting on the case the same day Mitzi went missing. The case has attracted widespread attention because similar incidents have occurred in their town before, raising concerns in the community. In fact, for years, an unknown perpetrator or perpetrators have been abducting children in Vallejo. The most recent case, before Mitzi's disappearance, occurred in December 1999. 7-year-old Xana Fairchild, who lived near Mitzi's home, disappeared on her way to school and, despite the efforts of the police and FBI, was never found. When Mitzi disappeared on her way home from school, police immediately suspected a connection to the unsolved case of Xana, who had disappeared under similar circumstances. Although the cases had striking similarities, the lack of leads hampered the investigation. Police revisited the initial list of suspects in Xana's case, but nothing came up. News of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, making headlines across the state. Fears of a serial kidnapper on the loose gripped the community, and the possibility of another victim was a terrifying prospect. Mitzi's family members gave numerous interviews in an attempt to keep the case alive and potentially gather more information. Her mother desperately called out to her kidnapper, pleading for her safe return. Police received numerous tips from the public, but unfortunately, none of them led to any breakthroughs in the case. However, everything changed 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, when something unexpected happened. A man contacted the police, telling them that he had discovered bloody rags in a dumpster. Upon examination, experts determined that the rags were actually bed sheets from a Vallejo hotel. This discovery led the police to the hotel to search for evidence and potential clues. Although they could not confirm whether Mitzi had stayed at the hotel, the bed sheets were sent to a lab for analysis, which would take several days to process. In addition to waiting for the test results, the police searched the dumpster, looking for any other clues, but found nothing. The next day, August 12th, the police received another call that changed the course of the case. At approximately 11 a.m., a man reported that he was driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, when a young girl ran up to his truck, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl then climbed into the cab of the truck and the driver saw a man running toward them. The girl screamed that he had kidnapped her and wanted to kill her. As soon as she got into the truck, the perpetrator turned around, got back in the car, and drove away. The driver then contacted the police and gave them the girl's name, Mitzi Sanchez. The officers immediately picked her up and took her to the hospital for evaluation. While at the hospital, Mitzi was able to speak to her mother on the phone. Shortly thereafter, her relatives arrived at the hospital and reunited with Mitzi. Meanwhile, the police spoke with the truck driver. He provided the kidnapper's license plate number, because it had driven right in front of his truck. Luckily, if he hadn't been there, the perpetrator might have caught up with the girl. The police ran the license plate and identified the car as belonging to a 39-year-old man named Curtis Dean Anderson. Curtis had a criminal record, including theft, kidnapping, and suspicion of other crimes. As the police focused their efforts on finding the kidnapper, their colleagues were ready to listen to Mitzi's account of what had happened to her. Mitzi explained that on August 10th, she was excited to go home after her last day of school to celebrate her birthday with her family. Instead of waiting for her brother, Mitzi decided to go alone. As she was walking home, she saw a car parked on the side of the road a few hundred yards away and noticed the driver watching her intently in the rearview mirror. Mitzi felt uncomfortable with him but quickly brushed it off. It was daytime, she was on a familiar street, and being young, she did not fully understand the potential danger posed by strangers. As Mitzi approached the car, the man got out and asked her to help him. He said he needed to get a roll of tape from under the car seat and explained that he could not bend down due to a leg injury from falling off his bike. Mitzi hesitated for a moment, initially hesitant, but her instinct to help others, passed down from her parents, eventually made her agree. As she reached into the car to get the tape, the man quickly pushed her into the car, covered her mouth to keep her from screaming, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The kidnapper had driven off in an unknown direction, and she looked out the window in horror. At one point, they passed Mitzi's house and she saw relatives preparing to celebrate her birthday. Minutes later, the kidnapper pulled into a deserted parking lot. He gave Mitzi new clothes, told her to change, and threw her old clothes in a nearby trash can. He also warned her not to try to escape, claiming that he had a gun and that no one could escape him. Over the next few hours, the man drove Mitzi in an unknown direction. At one point, she asked why he kidnapped her, and he simply replied that he had been kidnapped as a child. As night fell, he parked the car and began covering the windows with some rags. He then restrained Mitzi by tying her legs with padlocks. The kidnapper pulled out a bottle of alcohol and forced Mitzi to take a few sips. Although she initially resisted, Mitzi eventually complied with his demands. The man then took out his camera and took several photos of Mitzi before she got in the car. Fearing for her safety, Mitzi tried to stay awake and keep an eye on the situation. Mitzi thought about escaping as she struggled to stay awake. She caught a glimpse of a police car driving past the parking lot, but it was too far away. Even if Mitzi screamed, the police never heard her. The next day, the kidnapper continued to drive her around town. To hide her from view, he made her sit on the floor of the car and covered her with a blanket. Finally, he stopped the car and got out for a few minutes. During this short time, Mitzi tried to get her feet out of the chains, but unfortunately, it was not possible. She also discovered a nail file and tried to use it to pick the lock, but her efforts were unsuccessful. When the kidnapper returned to the car and drove away, he said he had stopped at her parents' house. The kidnapper pretended to be a concerned citizen and asked to distribute flyers around town. Mitzi was shocked and overwhelmed. She was so close to home but still held captive. Over the course of several hours, the kidnapper stopped several times, getting in and out of the car. When it got dark, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a heinous crime, sexually assaulting Mitzi. The traumatic experience left Mitzi in a state of shock, while the kidnapper fell asleep. The next morning, the perpetrator continued driving, stopping occasionally to buy cigarettes and alcohol. At one of these stops, as he returned to the car and leaned in, something fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed and caught a glimpse of a large set of keys. Mitzi realized that one of these keys was capable of unlocking the lock on her bike chain. Despite her fear of retaliation from her kidnapper, Mitzi mustered up the courage to act. She took out the keys, selected the one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock the chain. Surprisingly, it worked. Mitzi was free of the chain. Mitzi struggled to get out through the car window, but exhaustion left her barely able to move. She gathered all her strength, trying to lift herself up and jump out of the car. As she crawled around the car, she saw her captor, who had spotted her immediately. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi was determined to escape. Using the last of her strength, she ran in the opposite direction. The captor chased after her, while Mitzi waved desperately and shouted to the passing cars for help. Unfortunately, they all drove past without stopping. Mitzi continued to wave, because she knew that if she stopped for even a moment, the captor would catch up and harm her. Finally, she spotted a truck, ran towards it, and jumped in front of it. The driver quickly stopped, and Mitzi climbed into the cab. She was in shock, dehydrated and hungry, but her life was no longer in danger. At the hospital, doctors gave Mitzi the help she needed, and soon her entire family came to be with her. News of her miraculous rescue quickly spread, making headlines across the city. When Mitzi returned home, a large crowd of thousands had gathered on her street, cheering and celebrating her belated birthday. Meanwhile, the police were searching for the kidnapper Curtis Dean Anderson. When they showed his photo to Mitzi's mother, she realized that she had actually seen him twice. The first time was before Mitzi was kidnapped, when Curtis stood on the street and looked toward their house. The second time was the day after Mitzi went missing. Curtis came to her house and asked for flyers related to Mitzi's disappearance. The police continued to search for the suspect, Curtis, until late in the evening. They set up surveillance at all the locations he frequented, and he was finally arrested in a trailer park. He was arrested without incident. Curtis was then taken into custody pending trial. Police began investigating Curtis's possible links to other crimes. During the investigation, they learned that Mitzi was not his first victim. In fact, Curtis told Mitzi himself that she was not the first victim he had harmed and that no one had ever escaped him before. This statement led police to suspect that Curtis had committed crimes before Mitzi was kidnapped, despite his claims that none of his previous victims had survived. Curtis' actions suggested that he had experience committing such brutal crimes. It is worth noting that Curtis had been imprisoned for kidnapping a woman in 1991. He was released in November 1999. It was clear that Curtis intended to kill Mitzi. One specific detail that suggests the murder was planned occurred on the day of her escape. The police knew why Curtis stopped by the industrial park. Because he used to work there at one of the companies, and that day he visited his former co-workers. He asked them to give him a large bag, and the police immediately realized that he intended to use that bag to dump the body in. After Curtis was arrested, Mitzi struggled to recover for a long time. Her anxiety increased when the police suspected Curtis of being involved in Xana's kidnapping. Although Mitzi was relieved to be safe, she was still worried about the condition of her friend Xana Fairchild, 7, who had been missing for more than 8 months without any updates on her condition. Desperate to help find Xana, Mitzi joined a search effort, but unfortunately, no new leads were discovered. This continued until January 2001, when a human skull was found in the mountains near the city of Santa Cruz. Forensic analysis confirmed that the skull was that of Xana, and she was officially declared dead. This news devastated Mitzi. When the trial began in April 2001, Mitzi was required to testify about her experiences in front of a crowded courtroom. During her testimony, she had to provide every detail of what Curtis had done to her. Despite Curtis being present in the courtroom, Mitzi was still able to tell her story courageously. As a result, Curtis was sentenced to 251 years in prison, but his story did not end there. While in prison, detectives frequently questioned Curtis about his possible involvement in other crimes. A breakthrough came when an inmate reported that Curtis had confided in him about the kidnapping and murder of 8 girls. Although the inmate cooperated with police, sharing details of Curtis's story, he did not reveal all of his secrets. He did not deny the information he had confided in him, but instead attempted to negotiate benefits in exchange for speaking with police. Curtis eventually admitted to the murders of Xana Fairchild and at least 13 other girls and women. It was not until 2005 that he confessed fully to Xana's murder, for which he received an additional 50-year sentence. Mitzi's struggles did not stop after Curtis's trial. She faced a new challenge when she returned to school just weeks after her rescue. Her classmates bullied and taunted her, calling her the kidnapped girl and saying that she should have died instead of being saved. These cruel comments made her school years a burden, and eventually, she could no longer bear the pressure. Mitzi became increasingly dependent on alcohol to cope with the stress. And she felt desperate to return to normal life. However, her life took a drastic turn after a serious car accident at a party, in which she broke her neck and arm. She was in a coma for 2 weeks. When she woke up, doctors informed her that she was pregnant and would give birth to a baby girl. This news turned her life upside down, and Mitzi found the strength to change her life for the better. Curtis died of illness in 2007, 6 years after his conviction. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, a small town in the United States. As the youngest of 10 children, her parents faced great challenges in providing for their large family. In difficult circumstances, Crystal and her siblings grew up quite independently, with her parents being too busy to look after all the children. Fortunately, Crystal's older sister, who was only 12 years old when Crystal was born, took on the role of mother and looked after her younger brothers and sisters. Growing up in such a difficult environment, they all wanted to start their own lives as soon as possible, so her siblings lived in different cities and states. Crystal also dreamed of starting a family. While in high school, she met Tom and they eventually got married. Initially, they moved to California, but Crystal soon realized that city life was not for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine and settled in Bridgeton, a small town about an hour away from Crystal's hometown. The quaint town is famous for being the setting of Stephen King's novel, The Mist. Crystal worked at a local shoe store, while Tom held various part-time jobs. Later, Crystal found out she was pregnant and they welcomed their daughter, Sarah. Although Tom initially wanted to be a father, his relationship with Crystal became complicated after their daughter was born. He began spending more and more time at a local bar, wasting almost all of their money on alcohol. At one point, he even took all of Crystal's savings to buy groceries, leaving them without food. The financial burden of Tom's drinking problem became too much for their relationship, and Crystal eventually decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom still visited his daughter occasionally, but he was not actively involved in her life. The situation became worse when Tom started dating someone new and his girlfriend began harassing Crystal, constantly calling and threatening her, visiting her house and causing chaos in public, all because she could not accept Crystal's previous marriage to Tom. Crystal was hesitant about Sarah visiting her father because she was worried that his new girlfriend could endanger Sarah's safety. After her parents' divorce, Crystal moved in with her mother. She spent years saving money, and finally, she was able to buy her own house. The house was located in the suburb of Bridgeton, near a peaceful lake and a forest. Crystal and Sarah were delighted to finally have a place they could call their own. Crystal grew up in a large family, so when she had her own daughter, she gave her as much time, attention, and love as she could. After a long day at work, Crystal and her daughter, Sarah, would often rent a movie or just talk for hours. One evening, On May 10, 1994, when Crystal was 30 and Sarah was 12, they watched the solar eclipse together. The next day went as usual. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. That evening, they had dinner and Crystal put Sarah to bed. A few hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother screaming. At first, she thought Crystal was on the phone, arguing with someone. However, she quickly realized the situation was much more serious. Crystal's screams were loud and frantic, making Sarah think someone was attacking her mother. With the bedroom door ajar, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach, despite her mounting fear. She moved closer to the door, and as she listened, she realized the scream was coming from the kitchen. However, from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see what was happening. Sarah was terrified, not daring to move or make a sound, afraid of revealing her location. Then she heard footsteps, and her heart sank as she assumed that her mother's attacker was now coming for her. In a desperate attempt to escape, she hid behind the bed and waited anxiously for the door to open. However, instead of the door, she heard the sound of a kitchen drawer sliding open, followed by the sound of someone rummaging through utensils. Her mother's continuous screams and desperate pleas for forgiveness filled the house, and in the next few seconds, Sarah heard what sounded like someone had started stabbing her mother with a knife. With each brutal stab, her mother's cries grew fainter and fainter until they strangely stopped. Gathering her courage, Sarah finally left the room and went to the kitchen. What she saw was a horrifying sight. The only light came from the moon shining through the window, as the kitchen lights were off. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother lying on the floor in a large pool of blood that covered the entire floor. Despite her shock, Sarah knew she had to call for help immediately. Next to her mother's hand was a phone. Sarah quickly picked up the phone and dialed 911, but she only received complete silence on the other end of the line. She then ran to Crystal's room to try the second phone. But unfortunately, it didn't work either. Despite trying several times and getting the same result, Sarah realized that she had only one option left: to seek help from the neighbors. Braving the cold of the May night in only her pajamas and bare feet, Sarah ran out of the house and into the street. Her main concern was to find someone to help her injured mother. She started running to the nearest house, about half a mile away, towards the center of the city. However, when she knocked repeatedly, no one answered. Undeterred, Sarah continued to run to other nearby houses, knocking on each door, but still no one answered. Finally, after several attempts at many houses, Sarah arrived at a local Italian restaurant, whose owner lived in the adjacent building. She knocked desperately and finally got an answer. The owner, shocked by Sarah's panicked state, let her in and listened as she explained the urgency of the situation. Her mother had been attacked and she desperately needed help. Sarah then called 911 herself and reported what had happened. The police immediately arrived at their home. When they examined the front door glass, they discovered a fingerprint, which they quickly identified as Sarah's. A thorough search of the crime scene found no other fingerprints. However, the kitchen floor revealed several bloody shoe prints. Police took photographs to determine the size and style of the shoes, suspecting they belonged to the killer. The shoe prints led to Sarah's bedroom but mysteriously stopped at the entrance, as if the killer had returned without entering the room. Police noticed two unusual details at the crime scene. It was clear that the killer had tried to wipe some of the blood off the floor. However, it was clear that the killer could not remove all of the blood, as there was blood everywhere. However, there were also other drops that fell to the floor at right angles, and judging by the splatters from a greater height, the police speculated that the killer had injured himself during the murder, and that the blood was theirs. This theory was reinforced by the discovery of a trail of blood leading to a roll of tissue paper, but there were no remaining rolls nearby. It is possible that the killer used the tissue paper to stop the bleeding after being injured during the murder, and then immediately left the crime scene. Medical experts discovered more than 50 stab wounds on Crystal's body, indicating that this was a violent and intentional attack. The murder weapon, later determined to be a kitchen knife, was not found at the scene, suggesting that the killer had taken it with them when they left. During this process, a piece of the knife broke off and was embedded in Crystal's body, further highlighting the force used. Additional testing revealed that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, allowing experts to collect DNA and blood samples from the perpetrator. Despite this crucial evidence, the investigation was plagued by unexpected delays. Due to a lack of funding, the local lab was overwhelmed, so it would take at least 6 months to get the results. This forced the police to begin their investigation without any concrete evidence. Initially, the police ruled out a robbery, as nothing appeared to have been missing from the house. They also noted that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to conclude that the perpetrator was likely someone Crystal knew, as she likely opened the door for them. Since she was wearing pajamas at the time of the incident, it is unlikely that she was waiting for guests, leading police to speculate about a potential relationship between Crystal and her attacker. The police have two main theories about the case. Crystal knew the killer and let them in willingly, or the killer was a stranger who knocked on the door and tricked Crystal into opening the door. To gather more information, the police decide to start by questioning the only witness, Sarah. At the hospital, where Sarah is being checked, the police ask her why she ran to a neighbor's house for help instead of calling 911 from her own home. Sarah explains that she couldn't use her phone because it wasn't working, but the investigation finds this explanation suspicious, as both Sarah's and Crystal's phones were working properly when checked by the police at the crime scene. Police believe Sarah may have become confused due to the stress of the situation. Initially, they considered the possibility that the first phone was inoperable, as the first caller had turned off her phone and needed to reset it to make another call. As for the second phone, they did not rule out the possibility that Sarah may have dialed the wrong number in her haste or that the phone line may have been temporarily disconnected due to the rain. As the investigation continued, the police asked Sarah if she had seen the killer. Sarah replied that she had been in her bedroom during the incident. However, the police were a little skeptical of her story and asked how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife. Sarah's explanation was that it was obvious. But the police continued to press her. They felt that she might be withholding some information and that she had actually seen the killer. In the 3 days after the murder, the police interviewed Sarah 18 times. They hoped her story would change, but she stuck to her original account of events. Then the police found their first important clue. A local shoe store had a pair of boots with soles that matched the bloody footprints found at the scene. They also discovered that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, the girlfriend of her ex-husband Tom. Although the killer was clearly a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa because she had repeatedly threatened to kill Crystal. Teresa may have had someone help her commit the crime, but the police did not find any evidence to support this idea. During their investigation, they discovered that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years before Dennis started working at the shoe store where Crystal worked. They began dating soon after and eventually became engaged, although they never married. The police found that their relationship was strained, with frequent arguments between the couple and Dennis sometimes engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking things and punching walls. However, the police did not find any evidence that he had ever harmed Crystal. The day after the murder, the police came to Dennis's house. When he opened the door, they asked him if he had left the night before or if he had seen Crystal. Dennis immediately responded by asking if Crystal was dead, and he passed out shortly after. After regaining consciousness, Dennis began answering the police's questions. He explained that he had originally planned to visit Crystal that evening, but he had been late for work because he had helped a friend fix his car. When he finally returned home, he called Crystal, but she told him it was too late to visit. This led to an argument and Dennis stayed home. Although the police could not be 100% sure that he was telling the truth, they were able to verify that he had helped his friend fix his car that evening. Dennis also voluntarily took a lie detector test, which the police found no signs of lying. Although the police noticed that he had the same shoe size as the killer, they did not find any matching shoes in Dennis's home. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, but he asked the police to do him a favor, saying that if they decided to arrest him, they should enter his workplace through the back door to avoid disturbing others. He explained that his boss had always treated him well and he did not want to disrupt work. During the investigation, the police contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town. This friend shared a disturbing conversation she had had with Crystal just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Crystal expressed fear for Dennis. Their arguments escalated and Dennis became increasingly aggressive. Crystal considered ending the relationship but hesitated for fear of Dennis's reaction. The police then went to Crystal's workplace to further question her co-workers, but were unable to gather any useful information. As soon as the police left Crystal's workplace, Dennis entered and began asking what the co-workers had told the police. Despite the police's efforts, no evidence was found to implicate Dennis, and had to wait months for the DNA results, so they continued to search for other potential leads. This led them to a local man named Donnie, who had gotten drunk at a party and started bragging about killing Crystal. During the investigation, police brought Donnie in for questioning. However, the man claimed that he had no memory of attending a party and denied any involvement in the murder. Police later discovered that Donnie was an alcoholic and a notorious liar. In another development, a witness reported seeing a black pickup truck with New Hampshire plates near Crystal's neighborhood, but this lead ultimately went unanswered. Another witness came forward describing an incident in which she drove past Crystal's house on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing sirens, assuming they were related to her boyfriend, who lived down the street and was a frequent troublemaker. At the same time, she saw a car with headlights following her at high speed. Thinking that the driver was chasing her, she turned onto another street. However, the car passed her. Police have not been able to confirm whether the car was related to Crystal's murder. The investigation is still ongoing, and they have had difficulty finding any concrete evidence. In an effort to get the case back on track, Crystal's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information and has posted flyers around town to attract potential witnesses. However, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, Teresa, has been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers. Crystal's ex-husband, Tom, was investigated thoroughly, but police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. He was an alcoholic and had become worse over the years, leaving him almost drunk. In this state, it seemed impossible for him to commit such a crime, and he had no apparent motive. The police investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but found no connection between them and the crime. All the men, including Tom, provided DNA samples. The police waited for the test results, which took 9 months. When they did, they showed that the blood and semen samples did not match any of the suspects, including Dennis. With no new leads, the police requested a DNA sample from Dennis again for further testing, but the results remained the same. With no progress, they decided to re-interview their only witness, Sarah. They still believed that she was lying to them, or that her mind had blocked out the horrific memories of her mother's murder and that she had actually seen the killer. To investigate further, they traveled to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt, and took a polygraph test. The results showed no deception on Sarah's part. However, the police continued to interrogate her over and over again, asking the same questions. But she repeatedly insisted that she had not seen the killer. Ultimately, the case remained unsolved for years, with police continuing to interview witnesses and potential suspects, but without any significant breakthroughs. In the late 1990s, the FBI DNA database became available, allowing police to upload a DNA sample of Crystal's killer. However, no match was found. A new police officer took over the case in 1999, determined to review all the available evidence and collect more DNA samples from men in the town and surrounding areas. Advances in laboratory technology allowed for faster testing, and hundreds of samples were collected. Unfortunately, none of these samples matched the killer's DNA. The police also asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to explore the possibility of recovering repressed memories of the crime. Sarah agreed, but the psychologist concluded that her claim of not seeing the perpetrator was true and that she had not actually repressed any memories. Years passed. And despite the police's continued efforts, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of new leads. The case took a surprising turn in 2006 when police received news of a DNA match. A DNA sample entered into an FBI database matched blood and semen found at Crystal's crime scene. The DNA belonged to Michael Hutchinson, a man who had never been investigated or suspected in the case. Further investigation revealed that in 2003, Michael had been arrested and convicted of assault with a weapon, resulting in a 6-month prison sentence followed by 3 years of probation, during which time his DNA was collected. A DNA sample from Michael was initially collected but not uploaded to the FBI database and remained on file at the lab. Years later, Michael was arrested for driving drunk with a child in the car. After being released on bail, he failed to appear in court and was subsequently sent to jail. On the day of his wedding, Michael was arrested and taken into custody. A new DNA sample was taken from him, and this time, it was uploaded to the database immediately. Soon after, the police on Crystal's case received a match. They informed Sarah of the development but asked her to keep it a secret until formal charges were filed. The police also asked Sarah if she knew the suspect, and she said no. With Michael in custody, the police began to slowly build their case to ensure that the suspect had no chance of escaping punishment. They discovered that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's home. Michael was 19 and lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. Since Michael frequently visited his mother's house, just a short distance from Crystal's home, the police suspected that Michael may have seen Crystal on several occasions. The police visited Michael in prison and asked him about the murder, but Michael denied any involvement and claimed that he did not know Crystal. However, the police were skeptical of Michael's story, as his DNA was found on Crystal's body and his blood was found at the crime scene. While in custody, the police made an interesting observation about Michael. He had a large scar on the palm of his hand, which appeared to match the wound that Crystal's killer may have suffered during the murder. Although the scar alone was not enough to prove Michael guilty in court, the presence of his DNA firmly linked him to the crime. He was later charged with murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael, a user of illegal drugs, had frequently passed by Crystal's house, and that on the fateful night he decided to attack her. But he refused to plead guilty, so it is impossible to know how it all happened. But with the evidence available, the outcome was clear: Michael attacked and killed Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was also sought for the killer not leaving any fingerprints at the crime scene, as Michael worked as a bricklayer. Over time, people who do this work often have worn and torn patterns on their palms, making it impossible for them to leave fingerprints on the surface. In his testimony, Michael stated that he met Crystal at a bar and they went back to her place, where they had consensual sex. A man in a black motorcycle jacket broke into the house, attacked Michael, and killed Crystal. Michael regained consciousness and tried to fight off the attacker, but he was injured in the hand and the attacker escaped. However, Michael then left the crime scene without a valid reason, which raised doubts about his story. There were several inconsistencies, including the fact that the only shoe prints at the scene were Michael's, suggesting that if his testimony was true, the intruder would have had to remove his shoes before entering, which is highly unlikely. Additionally, there were no other signs of a break-in or struggle at the scene. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with a guilty verdict for Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael remains incarcerated to this day. The traumatic event of her mother's murder had a profound impact on Sarah. However, over time, she found the strength to rebuild her life. Sarah pursued further education, pursued a writing career, and eventually published a book chronicling her mother's murder, compiling all the available information. Furthermore, while writing the book, Sarah discovered new facts about the case that the police had overlooked. She discovered that Michael often borrowed his father's car, a black Ford pickup with New Hampshire license plates. This information was important because a witness had previously reported seeing a similar car near Crystal's house on the night of the murder. Another witness also reported seeing a car with its high beams speeding past her house that night. She initially thought the police were headed for her boyfriend's house because she mistook the sirens of an ambulance for police sirens. The woman's boyfriend was revealed to be Michael. The police had recorded his name and address in the report. However, they did not investigate him further at that time. Had the police investigated him further, they might have discovered the cut on his hand, potentially solving the case sooner. Unfortunately, past events cannot be changed.